You found MrNightfall, a place for long, atmospheric ghost stories and haunted encounters. Each tale is narrated slowly to help you unwind and rest. If you enjoy the stories, like, subscribe, and tell us where you're listening from tonight. Get comfortable, relax, and let the night unfold. Story 1. My upstairs neighbor keeps dropping something heavy every night at exactly 2:47 a.m. I'm writing this at 3:15 a.m. because I just can't deal with this anymore. I need advice or validation or just to know I'm not losing my mind. I moved into my apartment in downtown Chicago 6 weeks ago. It's a vintage building from the 1920s, converted into studios and one-bedrooms. The rent is decent for the location, hardwood floors, big windows, exactly what I was looking for. I'm on the 4th floor, Unit 4B. The problem started my very first night. I was lying in bed around 2:30 a.m., almost asleep, when I heard the loudest thud I've ever heard in my life. It came from directly above me, from apartment 5B. It sounded like someone had dropped a bowling ball or a sack of concrete. The whole ceiling shook. Picture frames rattled on my walls. I sat up in bed, heart pounding, waiting to hear footsteps or voices or something that would explain what just fell. Nothing. Total silence. I checked my phone. 2:47 a.m. exactly. I figured maybe someone dropped something while moving furniture or unpacking. Annoying. But it was a one-time thing. I went back to sleep. The next night, same thing. 2:47 a.m. Thud. Same volume, same intensity. My whole apartment vibrated. This time, I got out of bed and walked around. I was trying to figure out exactly where the sound was coming from. It seemed to be right above my bedroom, which would put it in the middle of the apartment above me. I stood there for 10 minutes, listening. No other sounds. No footsteps, no voices, no TV. Nothing. The next morning, I went upstairs to talk to my neighbor. I knocked on the door of 5B. No answer. I knocked again, louder. Still nothing. I tried the building manager. Her name is Cradle, and she's probably 70 years old, been managing this building for 30 years. I asked her about the tenant in 5B. "Oh, 5B is vacant," she said. "Has been for about 3 months. We're renovating it before we put it back on the market." "Are you sure? I keep hearing loud noises from up there at night." She frowned. "That's impossible. The apartment is locked. No one has access except me and the contractors, and they only come during the day." "Could you check? Maybe there's a leak or the pipes are making noise or something." She agreed to take a look. We went up together, and she unlocked the door. The apartment was completely empty. No furniture, no boxes, nothing. The floors were covered in dust. You could see our footprints in it, and there were no other footprints anywhere. No one had been in this apartment recently. Carol checked every room, bedroom, bathroom, kitchen, closets, all empty. She checked the pipes, the radiator, the windows. Everything looked fine. "I don't know what to tell you," she said. "There's nothing here that could make a loud noise. Maybe it's coming from a different apartment, and the sound is traveling funny through the building. Old buildings do that." That made sense, I guess. Sound can be weird in old buildings. I thanked her and went back to my apartment. That night, 2:47 a.m. Thud. I grabbed my phone and opened the recording app. I wanted to document this. The next night, same thing. I recorded it. When I played it back, you could clearly hear the thud. It was loud, deep, and it was definitely coming from above. I started keeping a log. Every single night, without fail, at exactly 2:47 a.m., The thud happened. Not 2:46, not 2:48, exactly 2:47. After a week of this, I was exhausted. I wasn't sleeping well. I'd lie awake from about 2:30 onwards, tensed up, waiting for it. Even when I tried to fall asleep earlier, I'd wake up right before it happened, like my body was anticipating it. I posted about it on Reddit, on a subreddit for apartment living. Most people said it was probably pipes, or the building settling, or maybe an animal in the walls. A few people suggested it might be a prank. Someone with access to the empty apartment messing with me. That got me thinking. I asked Carol if I could have a key to 5B just for a week so I could investigate. She was hesitant, but eventually agreed, as long as I promised not to disturb anything since they were planning to renovate. That night, at 2:45 a.m., I went upstairs with my phone and a flashlight. I unlocked the door to 5B and went inside. The apartment had the same layout as mine. Bedroom on the right, bathroom straight ahead, kitchen and living area to the left. I went to the spot directly above where I sleep, which would be the middle of the bedroom. I stood there watching the clock on my phone. 2:46, my heart was pounding. 2:47, nothing happened. I waited, still nothing, no thud, no sound at all, just silence. I walked through the entire apartment, checking every room. Nothing, no sound anywhere. Then I went back downstairs to my apartment. I lay down on my bed and checked my phone. 2:52 a.m. Had I somehow missed it? Was the sound not happening anymore? I was about to turn off my light when I heard it. Thud, right above me. I checked the time. 2:53 a.m. But I had just been up there. The apartment was silent at 2:47. So why did the thud happen at 2:53, 6 minutes later? Unless it didn't happen at the same time for everyone. The next night, I tried an experiment. I set up my phone to record in my bedroom, then went upstairs to 5B at 2:45. I recorded on my laptop up there too. At 2:47, nothing happened in 5B. I stayed until 2:55, then went back downstairs. I checked my phone recording. At 2:47, you could hear the thud, clear as day. But on the laptop recording from 5B, there was nothing. Complete silence. The sound was only happening in my apartment, or at least only I could hear it. That should have made me feel crazy, but actually it made me more convinced something was really wrong. Because my phone recordings proved the sound was real. It wasn't in my head. It was actually happening. I started researching the building's history. It was built in 1924, originally a hotel. In 1952, it was converted to apartments. I found old newspaper articles, building permits, historical society records. Then I found something interesting. An article from 1976, Tragedy at Riverside Apartments. A woman named Dorothy Kelvin had lived in apartment 5B. She was 34 years old, worked as a nurse. One night, she'd fallen in her apartment and hit her head on the corner of her dresser. She died from the head injury. Her body wasn't found for 3 days. The article said she was estimated to have died around 3 a.m. based on the coroner's report. I kept digging. I found Dorothy's obituary. There was a photo. A woman with dark curly hair smiling at the camera. She looked kind. The obituary said she was survived by her mother and a sister. I tried to find more details about how she died, but there wasn't much. Just that she'd fallen, hit her head, and died alone in her apartment. I thought about it. If she fell around 3 a.m. and I was hearing a thud at 2:47 a.m., that was 13 minutes before. Maybe the clocks were off in 1976? Or maybe I had the time wrong. I went back through all my recordings. Every single one was at 2:47 a.m. exactly. Then I had another thought. What if it wasn't when she fell? What if it was something else? I started having dreams, weird, vivid dreams. I'd be in my apartment, but it would look different. The walls were a different color. The furniture was old-fashioned. I'd hear footsteps above me, pacing back and forth. Then a door would open, and the footsteps would come downstairs. In the dream, I'd get out of bed and walk to my door. I'd open it and look out into the hallway. There'd be a woman standing there, dark curly hair, wearing a nurse's uniform. She'd look at me and put her finger to her lips. Shh. Then I'd wake up, always at exactly 2:47 a.m., right as the thud happened. After 2 weeks of this, I was barely functioning. I was calling in, sick to work, sleeping during the day, avoiding my apartment at night. My friends were worried about me. One suggested I see a doctor, maybe get sleeping pills. I decided to try one more thing. I went to the library and looked through the archives of old newspapers on microfiche. I was searching for anything else about Dorothy Kelvin or apartment 5B. I found something, an article from 3 weeks before Dorothy died. It was small, just a few paragraphs buried in the crime section. Police are investigating a suspicious person reported in the Riverside Apartments building. Multiple residents have reported seeing a man in the hallways late at night who does not live in the building. The man is described as tall, wearing dark clothing. Anyone with information is asked to contact police. 3 weeks later, Dorothy was dead. The police ruled it an accident. But what if it wasn't? I started thinking about the timing. 2:47 a.m., what if that wasn't when she fell? What if that was when someone broke into her apartment? I imagined a scenario, Dorothy asleep in 5B. A sound wakes her at 2:47 a.m. Heavy footsteps, someone coming into her apartment. She gets up startled. There's a confrontation. She runs, he chases, she falls or she's pushed and hits her head. The thud I was hearing wasn't her falling. It was the moment of the break-in, the moment everything went wrong. But why was I hearing it? Why was it repeating every night? I called Carol again and asked if I could see any records from 1976, anything about Dorothy Kelvin's death or the investigation afterward. She said she didn't have anything that old, but she gave me the number of the building's owner, a property management company. I called them. The woman who answered said she'd have to check their archives. A week later, she called me back. They did have some files from 1976. She could send me copies. When the copies arrived, I went through everything. Maintenance records, tenant complaints, police reports. Most of it was routine stuff. But there was one police report from April 1976, a month after Dorothy died. A tenant in 4B, my apartment, had reported that someone had tried to break into their apartment in the middle of the night. They heard someone trying the doorknob, then footsteps running away. Police investigated, but found no signs of forced entry and no suspects. The tenant moved out 2 weeks later. I felt cold. Someone had tried to break into 4B. The same night Dorothy died, or around the same time, someone had been targeting apartments on the 4th floor. I looked at the tenant's name on the police report, Sarah Chen. I tried to find Sarah Chen. It took me days of searching, but I finally found an obituary. Sarah Chen had died in 1982, at age 56. The obituary mentioned she was survived by a daughter, Lisa Chen, living in Evanston. I found Lisa on Facebook. I sent her a message explaining who I was and why I was contacting her. I asked if her mother had ever talked about living at Riverside Apartments. She responded the next day. Yes, her mother had lived there briefly in the 1970s. She'd moved out suddenly and never wanted to talk about why. But Lisa remembered her mother having nightmares for years afterward. She'd wake up screaming about a man in the hallway, a man trying to get into the apartment. I asked if her mother had ever mentioned the woman who died upstairs. Lisa said yes. Her mother felt guilty about it. She'd heard noises from upstairs the night Dorothy died, heavy footsteps, thumping sounds, but she thought it was just Dorothy moving furniture or something. She didn't call the police or check on her. If she had, maybe Dorothy would have survived. After Dorothy's death, Sarah started hearing the sounds every night, a thud at the same time. She thought it was her imagination, guilt manifesting as auditory hallucinations, but it drove her out of the apartment. I thanked Lisa and ended the conversation. I sat in my apartment, trying to process everything. Dorothy Kelvin died in 5B in 1976. Someone had broken in or tried to break in. Maybe he killed her. Maybe she fell while trying to escape. Either way, she died. Sarah Chin, living in 4B, heard it happen. She heard the moment the intruder broke in, the heavy thud of a door being forced or a body hitting the floor or something else. And she did nothing. After Dorothy died, Sarah started hearing the sound every night, the same thud at the same time, a reminder of what she'd heard and ignored. Now, almost 50 years later, I was living in 4B, and I was hearing it too. But why? I didn't even know Dorothy. I had nothing to do with what happened to her. Unless that's not how it works, unless the sound isn't about guilt. It's about the space. The apartment itself holds the memory of that night, and anyone who lives in 4B hears it over and over the moment when Dorothy's life ended. I decided to test a theory. I asked Carol if anyone else had lived in 4B between 1976 and now. She pulled up the records, 4 tenants between Sarah Chin and me. None of them stayed longer than 6 months. I asked if she knew why they left. She said she didn't have details, but she remembered the last tenant before me complained about noise from upstairs. They broke their lease early. It wasn't just me. It wasn't just Sarah. Everyone who lived in 4B heard it. I had to make a decision. I could break my lease and leave like everyone else. Or I could try to do something about it. I know this sounds crazy, but I felt like I owed it to Dorothy. She died alone, possibly murdered, and no one did anything. Sarah heard it happening and didn't help. The police ruled it an accident and moved on. For almost 50 years, she's been forgotten, except for this sound, this nightly reminder that something terrible happened and no one cared enough to find out the truth. I went back to the police records. Dorothy's case was closed decades ago, but I wanted to know if there was anything else. I filed a FOIA request for any investigation records related to her death. It took 3 weeks, but I got a response. They sent me copies of the original police report, the coroner's report, and the investigation notes. The police had investigated it as a possible homicide initially. Dorothy had defensive wounds on her hands. There were signs of a struggle, but there were no witnesses, no suspects, and no forensic evidence that could prove someone else had been there. Eventually, they ruled it an accidental death due to lack of evidence. But one detective's notes stood out. He'd written, "Victim's neighbor in 4B reported hearing disturbance around 2:45, 3 a.m., but did not investigate. Could not definitively establish if disturbance was related to victim's death. No other witnesses." Sarah had told the police she heard something, but she didn't check, and the police couldn't prove it mattered. There was also a note about a suspect. Person of interest, building maintenance worker, Thomas Alvin, 28. Multiple tenants reported Alvin had made inappropriate comments to female residents. Alvin quit job 3 days after victim's death, unable to locate for interview. Thomas Alvin, a maintenance worker who had access to all the apartments, who'd been creeping out female tenants, who disappeared right after Dorothy died. I searched for Thomas Alvin. I found a record of him in the Illinois criminal database. He'd been arrested in 1978, 2 years after Dorothy's death, for breaking and entering. He served 3 years in prison. After that, the record went cold. I searched for obituaries, death records, anything. I finally found a death certificate. Thomas Alvin died in 2003, age 55, in Indiana. Cause of death: liver failure. He was dead. If he had killed Dorothy, he'd never been punished for it. He'd lived another 27 years and died of natural causes. I don't know what I expected to happen after I found all this out. Some kind of closure, maybe. A feeling that I'd solved a mystery. But that night, at 2:47 a.m., the thud still happened. I got out of bed and stood in the middle of my room, right under where the sound came from. I spoke out loud, feeling ridiculous but needing to do something. "Dorothy, I know what happened to you. I know someone hurt you. I'm sorry no one helped you. I'm sorry you were alone." The thud came right on time. But this time, after it, I heard something else. Footsteps, light ones, walking across the floor above me. Then they stopped. My door was locked, but I heard my doorknob turn. Slowly, like someone was testing it, I stood frozen, staring at the door. The knob turned all the way, then released. The footsteps moved away down the hallway outside my apartment. I ran to the door and looked through the peephole. The hallway was empty, but on the floor, right in front of my door, there was something. I unlocked the door and looked. It was a small piece of paper, yellowed with age. On it, in handwriting that looked old-fashioned, were 2 words, "Thank you." I picked it up. It felt real, solid. I brought it inside and examined it. The paper was thin, fragile, like it was decades old. The ink was faded, but legible. I kept the note. I didn't know what else to do with it. That night, for the first time in 6 weeks, the thud didn't happen at 2:47 a.m. I woke up at 2:50, confused by the silence. I checked my phone. It was definitely after 2:47. The sound hadn't happened. I stayed awake until 4 a.m., waiting, but nothing. The next night, same thing. No thud. Complete silence. It's been 3 days now. The sound hasn't come back. I'm sleeping through the night for the first time since I moved in. I don't know what happened. I don't know if Dorothy somehow heard me, if acknowledging what happened to her was enough to give her peace. I don't know if ghosts are real, or if this was all some weird psychological phenomenon related to the building structure and my subconscious knowledge of its history. All I know is that it stopped. Carol called me yesterday. She said something strange happened. The contractors who were supposed to renovate 5B went in to start work, and they found something behind a loose baseboard in the bedroom, a small box, hidden there for decades. Inside the box were personal items, a bracelet, some letters, a photo, all belonging to Dorothy Kelvin. The letters were from her mother, sent right before Dorothy died. One of them mentioned that Dorothy had been scared recently, that she'd told her mother she felt like someone was watching her. Carol asked if I wanted to see the items before she turned them over to the Historical Society. I said yes. The photo showed Dorothy smiling in her nurse's uniform. On the back, in the same handwriting from the note, it said, "First day at County Hospital, 1975. It was definitely her handwriting, which means the note I found was real. Somehow, impossibly, Dorothy had left me a thank you note. I gave everything to the Historical Society, along with all the research I'd done about her death. They're going to create a small exhibit about her life. It's not much, but at least she'll be remembered for more than just how she died. Last night, I had another dream. I was in my apartment, and I heard footsteps above me, but this time they were light, peaceful. I looked up at the ceiling, and I felt calm. When I woke up, I found another note on my bedside table. Same paper, same handwriting. I can rest now. I'm not scared anymore. I don't know if Dorothy's still here or if she's moved on. But I think she knows someone finally cared about what happened to her. Someone tried to find the truth. The building manager told me yesterday that they're going to put up a small plaque in the lobby mentioning Dorothy and other long-term residents who made the building their home. It's a small gesture, but it means something. I'm staying in the apartment. I signed a lease extension. 4B doesn't scare me anymore. If anything, it feels peaceful now, like a weight has been lifted. Sometimes at night, I think I hear light footsteps above me, but they're not heavy or menacing. They're just someone walking around their home. Finally, at peace. And I sleep through the night, every night, without any interruptions. Whatever happened, whatever was causing that sound, it's over now. Dorothy can rest, and so can I. As this story comes to rest, a new whisper begins. I inherited a house where the previous owner never actually left. The lawyer's letter arrived on a Tuesday. The envelope thick and cream-colored, bearing a return address from a firm I'd never heard of in a town I'd only visited once as a child. My great-uncle Alastair had died, the letter informed me, at the age of 89. He'd left no immediate family, no spouse, no children, and for reasons the lawyer couldn't or wouldn't fully explain, he'd named me, his sister's grandson, whom he'd met exactly twice in his life, as the sole beneficiary of his estate. The estate consisted of one asset, a 2-story clapboard house on 5 wooded acres 20 miles outside of Blackwater Falls, a town so small it barely warranted a dot on most maps. I should have refused it. I should have written back that I had no interest in a stranger's house in the middle of nowhere, that I lived in a 1-bedroom apartment in the city and had no desire to become a property owner, especially not of some decaying rural homestead. But my mother's voice echoed in my head when I read the letter. Alastair was always odd, but he was kind to me when no one else was. Go see the place at least, for me. And beneath that, the quieter, more practical voice. The house was paid off. Property taxes in that county were negligible. It could be rented out, or sold, or used as a weekend retreat. It was, in purely financial terms, a gift I couldn't afford to refuse. I drove out on a Saturday morning in late October, the road narrowing from 4 lanes to 2 to a single winding ribbon of asphalt, hemmed in by skeletal oaks and maples still clinging to a few stubborn crimson leaves. The GPS lost signal 7 miles from town. I found the house by the faded green mailbox at the end of a gravel drive, its numbers 1734, so weathered they were nearly illegible. The house itself was smaller than I'd imagined, white paint peeling in long curls like sunburnt skin, a sagging porch wrapped around the front and one side, windows dark and watchful beneath a roof of moss-flecked shingles. It looked less abandoned than waiting. The lawyer had mailed me the key a week earlier, a heavy old-fashioned brass thing that fit smoothly into the lock despite the rust staining the knob. I turned it. The door swung inward without a sound, as if recently oiled. That should have been my first warning. An empty house, standing for weeks after its owner's death, shouldn't have a door that opened so easily. It should have stuck in the frame from humidity or groaned on stiff hinges. But it opened silently, revealing a dim interior that smelled not of dust and decay, but of lemon polish and wood smoke. "Hello?" I called out, my voice swallowed by the stillness. Stupid, I knew. No one should be here. The lawyer had assured me the house had been empty since Alistair's body was discovered 3 weeks earlier by a neighbor who'd grown concerned when the morning paper remained on the step for 2 days running. But the smell of a recent habitation clung to the air, unsettling me. I stepped inside. The front room was a parlor frozen in the 1970s. Plaid sofa, wood-paneled walls, a television set with a curved screen and knobs instead of buttons. But everything was immaculate, not sterile, not staged for sale, but lived in clean. A book lay open on the side table. John le Carré's Tinker, Tailor, Soldier, Spy, a pair of reading glasses resting on the page as if their owner had just stepped away for a moment. A half-full glass of water sat beside it, condensation still beading the sides. I touched the glass. Cold, ice cold. My skin prickled. I backed toward the door, heart hammering. Someone had been here recently, perhaps was still here. I fumbled for my phone, no signal, of course, and considered running back to my car, but then rationality reasserted itself. The neighbor, the lawyer, someone maintaining the property until the estate settled, that was all. They'd been here this morning, perhaps, left the glass of water, stepped out when they heard my car on the gravel drive. I took a deep breath and continued my tour. The kitchen was equally pristine, counters wiped clean, dishes dry in the rack beside the sink, a cast-iron skillet hanging from a hook above the stove, still warm to the touch when I brushed against it. A single coffee mug sat in the sink, a faint brown ring staining the bottom. In the refrigerator, milk sat in its carton, a week past its expiration date, but still smelling fresh. Eggs, butter, a wedge of cheddar cheese wrapped in wax paper. Not the provisions of a man on his deathbed, the provisions of a man expecting to eat breakfast tomorrow. Upstairs, 2 bedrooms. The first, clearly Alistair's. A narrow bed with a faded quilt, a dresser topped with a hairbrush still holding strands of fine white hair, a wallet lying open on the nightstand. I picked it up with trembling fingers. Driver's license photo. A gaunt man with watery blue eyes and a shock of white hair. Age 87 in the picture, though. He'd died at 89. $20 in cash. A library card. No family photos. I set it down carefully, feeling like a trespasser. The second bedroom had been kept as a guest room. Neatly made bed, empty closet, a layer of fine dust on the dresser that hadn't been disturbed in years. This room felt truly empty. The rest of the house did not. I spent 3 hours walking through those rooms, my unease growing with each passing minute. The house was a paradox, a place recently vacated, yet supposedly empty for weeks. Nothing was out of place. Nothing was missing. It was as if Alistair had stepped out for a walk and would return at any moment to finish his book, drink his water, wash his coffee mug. I decided to stay the night. Not out of bravery, I was terrified, but out of a stubborn need to prove to myself that my fear was irrational. I brought a sleeping bag and a change of clothes, planning to camp on the living room floor. As dusk settled over the woods, painting the sky in shades of violet and burnt orange, I built a fire in the stone hearth using kindling I found stacked neatly in a copper bucket beside the fireplace. The flames caught quickly, casting dancing shadows across the wood-paneled walls. That's when I noticed the photographs. I'd been too focused on the strangeness of the house's condition to really look at the decor. Now, in the firelight, the pictures on the walls emerged from the gloom. Dozens of them. Black and white, sepia, color fading to magenta. All of them featured the same man at different ages. Alistair as a boy with a cowlick and knobby knees. Alistair as a young man in military uniform. Alistair middle-aged, standing beside a car with tail fins. Alistair older, gaunter, standing on this very porch. But in every single photograph, he was alone. No parents, no siblings, no friends, no wife. Just Alistair. Through the decades, growing progressively more isolated, his smile never quite reaching his eyes. The final photograph hung above the mantelpiece. Alistair in his late 80s, standing in this room, wearing the same brown cardigan I'd seen folded neatly at the foot of his bed upstairs. He was looking directly at the camera, his expression impossible to read, not hostile, not welcoming, but watchful, patient, as if he knew someone would be standing where I now stood, looking up at him. I slept poorly that night. Every creak of the house settling sounded like a footstep. Every rustle of leaves against the window pane sounded like breathing. I woke repeatedly, convinced I heard the soft click of a door closing downstairs, the whisper of fabric moving through a room. Each time, I'd lie frozen in my sleeping bag, straining to hear over the thudding of my own heart. Each time, silence would return. By dawn, I was exhausted, my nerves frayed to breaking. I decided to leave after breakfast. I'd seen enough. I'd call the lawyer Monday and tell him to put the house on the market. I didn't care about the money. Some inheritances weren't worth the price. I was pouring water into the electric kettle I'd found in a cabinet when I saw it. On the kitchen table, beside the salt and pepper shakers, lay a single sheet of lined notepaper. I hadn't seen it yesterday. I was certain of it. I'd examined that table thoroughly, running my fingers over its scarred surface. There had been nothing on it but a ceramic bowl holding 3 unblemished apples. Now there was a note. My hands trembled as I picked it up. The handwriting was spidery but precise, the ink slightly faded as if written with an old ballpoint pen. The sugar is in the blue canister. The coffee is fresh. Help yourself. No signature, no date. Just those 11 words. I dropped the note as if burned. My breath came in short, sharp gasps. I backed away from the table, my eyes scanning the room. The closed door to the basement, the narrow hallway leading to the back door, the staircase to the second floor. The house was silent, still, but I was no longer alone in it. I fled without making coffee, without eating the apples. I stuffed my sleeping bag into its sack with frantic, clumsy movements and practically ran to my car, fumbling with the keys, my eyes fixed on the house's dark windows as I reversed down the gravel drive. I didn't look back until I reached the main road. In the rearview mirror, the house stood silent and still against the morning light. But in the upstairs window, the guest room window that had been dusty and empty the day before, a pale face looked out, gaunt, frail, watching me go. I drove straight to the Blackwater Falls Sheriff's Department, a single-story brick building next to the post office. The deputy on duty, a heavy-set man named Rawlins with a kind face and tired eyes, listened patiently as I stammered out my story. The cold glass of water, the warm skillet, the note on the table, the face in the window. When I finished, he didn't laugh. He didn't call me crazy. He just sighed, a long, weary exhalation that seemed to carry the weight of years. "Alistair Pembroke," he said, writing nothing down. "Found in his bed by old Mrs. Gable next door. Peaceful," the coroner said. "Heart just gave out in his sleep. Been alone out there 40 years since his sister passed. Before that, lived with his parents until they died. Before that, well, he was always alone, far as anyone can tell." "He's still there," I insisted, my voice cracking. "I'm not imagining things. Someone's in that house." Rawlins leaned forward, resting his elbows on the scarred wooden desk. "Son, the house has been locked since we removed the body. Mrs. Gable has the spare key. She checks on it every few days, makes sure pipes haven't frozen, that no kids have broken in. She's the only one besides the lawyer who's been inside since he died." "Then how do you explain the note?" I demanded, pulling the crumpled paper from my pocket and smoothing it on the desk between us. Rawlins picked it up, studied it for a long moment, then handed it back. "Alistair Pembroke wrote that," he said quietly. "I'd know his handwriting anywhere. He used to send notes to the station every Christmas. Season's greetings from Alistair Pembroke on that same lined paper. But he's been dead 3 weeks. Mrs. Gable," I said, "she must have written it as a joke, or to scare me off so she can get the house herself." Rawlins shook his head. "Edith Gable is 82 years old and walks with a cane. She couldn't drive the 5 miles to that house, let alone sneak in and out without you hearing her, and she wouldn't play a cruel joke like that. She liked Alistair, brought him soup when he was sick last winter." He studied me for a long moment, his gaze not unkind. "You know what I think?" he said finally. "I think Alistair Pembroke lived alone in that house for so long that the walls absorbed him, his routines, his habits, his presence. And now that he's gone, the house is still performing them, like a record player that keeps spinning after the needle's been lifted. The note wasn't meant for you. It was just part of the pattern. The house making coffee for its owner, setting a place at the table, waiting for him to come home." I left the sheriff's department unsettled but slightly calmer. Rawlins' explanation was supernatural, yes, but not malicious. A haunted house wasn't necessarily a dangerous house. Perhaps this was just residual energy, a psychic echo of a lonely man's daily life. I could handle that. I could sell the property to someone who believed in that sort of thing, a paranormal investigator, a writer, looking for inspiration. I returned to the house 3 days later, armed with a digital recorder, an EMF meter I'd borrowed from a friend who dabbled in ghost hunting, and a determination to document whatever was happening there. If I could prove it was haunted, I could sell it at a premium to the right buyer, turn my inheritance into opportunity. The house greeted me with the same lemon and wood smoke smell, the same impossible cleanliness. I set up my equipment in the living room, placed the recorder on the coffee table, and spoke clearly into it. October 28th, 3:17 p.m., day 1 of documentation. House appears undisturbed since my last visit. I spent the afternoon methodically searching every room, every closet, every cabinet. I found nothing out of place, no hidden passages, no secret rooms, no evidence of recent human occupation beyond what I'd already observed. At dusk, I built another fire and sat before it, recorder running, EMF meter resting on my knee. The needle remained steady at baseline. At exactly 8:03 p.m., the kitchen light clicked on. I froze. I hadn't touched the switch. I'd been sitting in the living room the entire time, the kitchen visible through the open archway. The light, a single bare bulb hanging from a cord in the center of the ceiling, glowed steadily, illuminating the empty room. I forced myself to stand, to walk slowly toward the kitchen archway. My heart hammered against my ribs. I stopped at the threshold and looked in. The table was set for one. A plate, a fork, a knife, a napkin folded neatly beside the plate. And in the center of the table, a bowl of vegetable soup steamed gently, tendrils of vapor curling toward the ceiling. I didn't touch anything. I backed away slowly, returned to the living room, and gathered my equipment. I was leaving. Immediately. No documentation. No proof. Some things weren't meant to be recorded. As I reached for the front doorknob, a voice spoke from directly behind me. "Leaving so soon?" I spun around, a cry catching in my throat. He stood in the center of the room. Alistair Pembroke, gaunt and pale in his brown cardigan, just as he appeared in the photographs. Translucent in the firelight, his form shimmering slightly at the edges like heat haze on asphalt. But undeniably there, undeniably real. "You're not real," I whispered, my voice trembling. A sad smile touched his lips. "I'm as real as this house, as real as the routines that built it, as real as the loneliness that filled it." He gestured around the room. "I didn't mean to frighten you. The note, the soup. I was only trying to be a good host." "Why are you still here?" I asked, my fear giving way to a strange, aching pity. "Because I never left," he said simply. "Not really. You see, when you live alone for as long as I did, when every meal is eaten at this table, every book read in that chair, every thought within these walls, the boundary between self and structure begins to blur. The house doesn't just contain you, it becomes you. And when the body fails," he looked down at his translucent hands, "the rest remains, not as a ghost, not as a spirit, but as a habit, a pattern. The house continuing to perform the functions of its occupant." He drifted toward the window, his form passing through the arm of the sofa without disturbing the fabric. "I died in my sleep 3 weeks ago." My heart stopped. But the house didn't know. It woke at 6 a.m. as it always did. It brewed coffee. It set the table. It waited for me to come downstairs. And when I didn't, it kept waiting. It still waits. Every morning at 6, every evening at 8. the house making dinner for a man who will never eat again. Tears welled in my eyes, not from fear, but from the profound tragedy of it, a lifetime of solitude so complete that death itself couldn't break the patterns of living. "What do you want?" I asked softly. He turned to face me, his watery blue eyes holding mine. "I want you to stay, not forever, just for a little while. Long enough for the house to learn a new pattern, long enough for it to understand that someone else lives here now. Otherwise," he gestured to the walls around us, "otherwise it will keep setting one place at the table until the roof collapses and the walls rot away. A century from now, children will dare each other to spend the night here, and at 8:03 p.m., they'll hear a spoon clinking against a bowl that isn't there. This house will be haunted not by me, but by its own memory of me, and that would be a terrible loneliness." I stayed. Not that night. I couldn't. I drove back to my apartment in the city, my mind reeling. But I returned the next weekend, and the weekend after that. I began spending Fridays through Sundays at the house, slowly, deliberately establishing my own routines within its walls. I drank coffee from a different mug than the one I'd found in the sink. I read books from the town library rather than the ones on Alistair's shelves. I cooked my own meals, setting two places at the table even when eating alone. I spoke aloud as I moved through the rooms. "I'm going upstairs now. I'm making toast. I'll be back in an hour," giving the house a new voice to absorb. At first, Alistair's presence remained strong. I'd find his book still open on the side table each morning, though I closed it every night. The single place setting would appear at 8:03 p.m. sharp, though I'd cleared the table hours earlier. But gradually, almost imperceptibly, things began to change. One evening, I came downstairs to find 2 bowls of soup steaming on the table. Another morning, I discovered my own book, The Overstory by Richard Powers, lying open on the sofa cushion where I'd left it, but with Alistair's reading glasses resting on the page. He never appeared to me again after that first conversation, but I felt him, felt his approval in the subtle shifts of the house's behavior. The thermostat adjusted itself to my preferred temperature. The radio in the kitchen, which I'd never touched, began playing classical music softly in the afternoons. The same station Alistair must have listened to for decades. Once, waking in the middle of the night, I found a quilt draped over me that hadn't been on the bed when I fell asleep. On my 8th weekend there, I woke at 5:58 a.m. to the sound of the percolator gurgling in the kitchen. I lay in bed listening, waiting for the usual sequence. The click of the stove igniting, the soft clink of a single mug being set on the counter. But this time, after the percolator finished its cycle, I heard 2 mugs being placed side by side, 2 spoons stirring, 2 chairs being pulled out from the table. I got up and walked downstairs. The kitchen was empty, of course, but on the table sat 2 steaming mugs of coffee, 2 plates with toast, 2 sets of silverware, and between them, folded neatly on a 3rd plate, was a note in that same spidery handwriting. "Thank you for the company. It's been a long time." I sat down and drank the coffee. It was perfect. Black, no sugar, exactly how I liked it. How I'd been making it every morning for weeks. The house had learned. I live in the house full-time now. I quit my job in the city and found freelance work that lets me stay here. I've repainted the living room a soft sage green. I've planted a garden in the backyard. I've filled the empty guest room with my own books and photographs. The house is mine now, but it's not empty. Some nights, when the wind blows just right through the oaks outside my window, I hear it. Not a voice, not a footstep, but the soft, rhythmic sound of someone turning the pages of a book in the room below. And on winter evenings, when I build a fire, I sometimes catch a flicker of movement in my peripheral vision, a gaunt figure in a brown cardigan settling into the armchair opposite mine, warming his hands before the flames. I never look directly at him. I don't need to. I simply pour 2 cups of tea and set one on the small table beside his chair. The previous owner never left, but he's not haunting this house anymore. He's keeping it company. And after 40 years of solitude, I think that's exactly what he needed. What we both needed. Some inheritances aren't houses or land or money. Some are simply the gift of not being alone. And in the quiet hours between midnight and dawn, when the fire has burned to embers and the wind has stilled, I sometimes think I hear 2 heartbeats in this house instead of one. Slow, steady, finally at peace. This is where the story ends. Let's continue with the next, the dead frequency of station K109. I am writing this on a typewriter because I can no longer trust anything with a screen. If you see a digital clock flicker, if your phone buzzes but no one is calling, if the radio in your car turns on by itself, run. Do not investigate. Do not try to tune it in. Just run until you find silence. My name is Elias. I was a radio enthusiast, a ham operator, the kind of guy who spent his weekends building antennas in his backyard and listening to static from across the ocean. I love the noise. I love the idea that the air around us is filled with invisible voices just waiting to be caught. I found the job on a forum for vintage electronics. A user named Signal Master posted a request for a caretaker for an old AM radio station in the Mojave Desert. Station K109, night shift engineer, maintain transmitter, log signal strength, 3,000 month, cache, isolation required. It was perfect for me. I needed the money and I wanted to get away from the city, from the noise of modern life. I drove out to the coordinates. It was miles from civilization, a small concrete building at the base of a massive rusted radio tower that stretched hundreds of feet into the desert sky. The tower hummed. You could feel it in your teeth when you got close. The previous engineer was waiting for me. He was a thin, twitchy man named Ornate. He had dark circles under his eyes and chewed his fingernails until they bled. "It's automated," Ornate said, shoving a ring of keys into my hand. "The playlist is on a loop. Old jazz, big band, stuff nobody listens to. Your job is to keep the transmitter cool. Check the gauges. If the needle goes into the red, flip the breaker. That's it." "Why do you need a person here if it's automated?" I asked. Ornate looked at the tower. "Because sometimes it drifts. The signal drifts. You have to bring it back." "Drifts to where?" He didn't answer. He got in his truck and sped off, leaving a cloud of dust that hung in the still air. I settled in. The station was a time capsule. Reel-to-reel tape decks, vacuum tube amplifiers, a smell of ozone and old dust. The only modern thing was a small mini-fridge in the corner. The first week was peaceful. I sat in the control booth, watching the VU meters bounce to the rhythm of Duke Ellington and Benny Goodman. I read books. I drank coffee. I watched the sun set over the dunes. But on the 8th night, the drift started. It was 2 lakhs a.m. The station was playing a slow, mournful trumpet solo. Suddenly, the music warped. It slowed down, the pitch dropping until it sounded like a dying cow. Woo! Then static, white noise that sounded like screaming. I looked at the frequency dial. It had moved. We were supposed to be at 1090 a.m. The needle was drifting down 1080, 1070, 1060. I grabbed the manual tuning knob. It was hot to the touch. I tried to turn it back, but it fought me. It felt like someone was holding it from the other side. "Come on," I grunted, twisting hard. The static cleared, but it wasn't jazz. A voice cut through the speakers, a voice that sounded wet, gargled, like someone speaking with a throat full of water. "Is anyone listening?" I froze. This was a broadcast frequency. It shouldn't be picking up two-way traffic. I grabbed the microphone. "This is station K109. You are interrupting a broadcast. Identify yourself." Silence. Then a laugh, a dry, crackling laugh. "Elias, you have pretty eyes." I dropped the mic. It hit the desk with a thud. How did they know my name? I hadn't told anyone I was here except the forum user, and I used a pseudonym online. I wrestled the tuning knob back to 1090. The jazz returned, upbeat and cheerful, mocking my fear. I checked the transmitter logs. There was no record of the interruption. According to the machine, the jazz had been playing the whole time. I told myself it was interference. A trucker with a powerful CB radio messing with me. The next night, it got worse. I was doing my rounds, checking the massive cooling fans in the transmitter room. The hum of the tower was louder tonight. It felt heavy, pressing on my chest. As I walked past the main capacitor bank, I heard tapping. Tap, tap, tap. It was coming from inside the metal casing of the transmitter. I stopped. "Hello?" Tap, tap, tap. It was rhythmic, intelligent. I put my ear against the warm metal. "Let us out," a chorus of whispers said. It sounded like hundreds of people whispering in unison. "It burns! The wire burns!" I jumped back. Then the lights in the room flickered and died. The only light came from the glowing orange vacuum tubes inside the transmitter. In that dim orange light, I saw shadows moving, not on the walls, inside the tubes. The vacuum tubes were glass cylinders the size of milk jugs. Inside, filaments glowed to amplify the signal. But inside tube 4, something was crawling. A black, shadowy shape, pressing its hands against the glass from the inside. It had a face of pure anguish, mouth open in a silent scream. I ran back to the control booth and locked the door. I grabbed the station phone to call the owner, "Signal Master." The line was dead. No dial tone, just the sound of wind. Then the wind stopped, and a voice spoke. "Don't leave, Elias. The broadcast is just starting." I slammed the phone down. I sat in the chair, staring at the glass window that looked out into the desert. It was pitch black outside. Then the on-air light turned on. I hadn't touched the console. The music stopped. A voice came over the studio monitors. It was my voice. "Welcome back to the midnight hour," the voice said. "Tonight, we have a special request for Elias, a song from the other side." Then a sound began to play. It wasn't music. It was the sound of digging. Shovels hitting dirt, crunch, scrape. Then the sound of wood splintering. A coffin lid breaking. Then heavy breathing. I covered my ears. "Stop it! Stop it!" I reached for the master breaker to kill the power. My hand stopped inches from the switch. Pain, white-hot pain, shot through my arm. I looked down. My veins. The veins in my arm were glowing orange, like the vacuum tubes. I could feel the electricity surging through me. I was becoming part of the circuit. "Do not cut the signal," my own voice said through the speakers. "We need the carrier wave. We need to travel." I fell to the floor, convulsing. The pain was unbearable. I could feel voices in my head, memories that weren't mine. I remembered dying in a fire. I remembered drowning in a lake. I remembered being buried alive. They were the voices of the dead, and they were using the radio tower as a bridge. I blacked out. I woke up the next morning on the floor. The sun was shining. The jazz was playing. My arm was burned, a Lichtenberg figure scar tracing down my skin like a lightning strike. I packed my bag. I was leaving. I didn't care about the money. I walked to my car. It wouldn't start. The battery was dead, completely drained. I checked my phone. Dead. I was stranded. I walked back to the station. I had to fix the car or find a radio to call for help. I went to the workshop in the back. I found a spare battery. As I was carrying it to the car, I looked up at the tower. There was something climbing it. A man. He was halfway up, clinging to the metal struts. "Hey!" I yelled. "Get down! It's dangerous!" He stopped. He turned his head 180 degrees like an owl. It was ornate, the previous engineer, but his eyes were gone, burned out sockets, and his mouth was sewn shut with copper wire. He let go of the tower. He fell hundreds of feet. I watched him hit the ground. Thud. I ran over to him. His body shattered on impact, but there was no blood. He was hollow. His skin was just a shell. Inside, he was filled with old radio parts, transistors, wires, capacitors. He was a machine made of meat and junk. And he was still moving. His broken hand reached up and grabbed my ankle. A voice came from his chest, sounding like a broken speaker. "You are the new component. You must maintain the signal." I kicked him off and ran. I ran into the desert. I didn't know where I was going. I just ran away from the tower. I walked for hours. The sun beat down on me. I was dehydrated, delirious. I saw a house in the distance, a small shack. I ran to it. "Help, please!" I burst through the door. It was the control room. I was back at the station. I had walked in a circle. No, I had walked straight. The space around the tower was warped. It was a loop. I collapsed in the chair. The sun went down. The on-air light turned on. "Welcome back, Elias," the voice said. "Tonight, we are going to open the channel wide." The frequency dial began to spin on its own, fast, a blur. The hum of the tower grew to a deafening roar. The glass of the control booth window shattered. Outside, in the desert, the sand began to vibrate. Shadows rose from the dunes, thousands of them. The ghosts of the airwaves, they floated toward the station. I knew what they wanted. They wanted a body. They wanted my body. I looked at the console. I couldn't turn it off. They controlled the power. But I saw the microphone cable. It was an XLR cable, thick and shielded. If I couldn't stop the signal, I had to stop the receiver. I grabbed the cable. I wrapped it around the main output transformer. I grounded the positive lead to the negative. A short circuit. I pulled tight. Boom! The console exploded. Sparks showered the room. Fire erupted from the tape decks. The screaming from the speakers turned into a high-pitched shriek of agony. "No!" The tower outside groaned. Metal twisted. I ran out the back door as the building caught fire. The tower was glowing red hot. The metal was melting. It collapsed. It fell in slow motion, crashing into the dunes with the force of a meteor. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I have ever heard. I walked again. This time, the loop was broken. I found a highway by morning. I hitched a ride to the nearest town. I thought I was free, but I am not. I am writing this in a library. The person next to me is listening to music on headphones. I can hear it. Not the music. I can hear the static underneath the music. And in the static, I hear my name, Elias. We are still broadcasting. And my arm, the scar on my arm, is glowing, faintly, orange. I am a receiver now. I can't be around people. If I touch someone, they hear it too. They start to scream. They start to remember deaths they haven't died yet. I am going to the mountains, to a cave, somewhere deep underground where radio waves can't reach. If you hear a song on the radio that slows down, if you hear a voice that sounds like wet gravel, change the station. Change it fast, before it changes you. That's the end of this story. Now we move on. The Ghost in Apartment 4B keeps leaving. Fresh flowers on my pillow. I should have asked why the rent was so low. That's the thought that echoes through my mind now, lying awake at 3 a.m., with the scent of lilies thick in the air and another offering resting on my pillow, a single white camellia, dewdrop still glistening on its petals, though no florist in this city would have them in November. But when I signed the lease 3 weeks ago, desperation had clouded my judgment. Fresh out of grad school with a useless degree in art history and $20,000 of student debt, I'd been sleeping on a friend's couch for 2 months when I found the listing for 3B at the Hawthorne Arms. 1 bedroom, hardwood floors, bay window, $650 a month. Half the market rate for anything remotely habitable in the city. The property manager, a harried woman named Diane who smelled of cigarette smoke and regret, had barely looked at my application before sliding the lease across her desk. "Just one rule," she'd said, tapping a chipped fingernail against the paper. "Don't go up to 4B. It's been vacant since the incident. Building code violation. Stairs are unsafe." She'd said it so casually, like mentioning a broken elevator or spotty Wi-Fi. I'd signed without asking what incident she meant. The Hawthorne Arms was a 5-story walk-up built in 1923, all crumbling brick and ornate cornices blackened by decades of city soot. My apartment, 3B, was smaller than advertised but charming in its decay. The bay window overlooked a narrow alley where fire escapes zigzagged up the neighboring building. The kitchen had actual cabinets instead of particle board shelves, and the bedroom ceiling curved in a gentle barrel vault that made the space feel like a sanctuary. The only oddity was the ceiling itself, directly above my bed, centered perfectly as if placed there with intention, was a water stain in the shape of a weeping willow. I noticed it the first night, lying in my sleeping bag on the bare mattress, my few boxes stacked against the walls. The stain wasn't new. The plaster around it was yellowed with age. But it was unmistakable, a graceful cascade of branches drooping toward the floor, each tendril rendered in shades of ochre and umber. I fell asleep wondering what pipe had burst years ago to create such an elegant ruin. I woke at dawn to the scent of gardenias, not the cloying, artificial fragrance of air freshener or candle wax, but the real thing, the heavy, intoxicating perfume of fresh-cut blooms. Disoriented, I sat up and found them immediately. 3 perfect gardenias nestled in the hollow my head had left on the pillow, their waxy white petals cool against my fingertips. I stared at them for a full minute, my sleep-fogged mind cycling through explanations. A welcome gift from a neighbor? But I'd met no one in the building. A prank from the previous tenant? But Diane had assured me the apartment had been professionally cleaned and vacant for 6 weeks. I finally decided I must have bought them myself the day before during my furniture shopping frenzy and forgotten in my exhaustion. It was the only rational explanation. I placed the flowers in a glass of water on the windowsill and went about my day. The next morning, it was lilacs, a small bouquet bound with twine resting precisely where my head had been. These I couldn't explain away. I hadn't left the building since returning from my job hunt the previous afternoon, and the nearest florist was 10 blocks away. My heart began to beat faster as I examined the blooms. They were impossibly fresh, the purple petals unfurling perfectly, stems crisp and unblemished. No florist's tag, no note, just flowers appearing overnight on my pillow like an offering. I spent that day researching the building. The local library's microfiche archives held a century of city newspapers. It took 3 hours of squinting at flickering images before I found it. A brief article from April 1987. Buried on page 14, woman found deceased in Hawthorne Arms apartment. Eleanor Voss, 72, a retired botanist and lifelong resident of apartment 4B, had been discovered by her nephew after failing to answer phone calls for a week. Cause of death. Natural causes. But the article contained a curious detail that made my blood run cold. Ms. Voss was known throughout the neighborhood for her rooftop garden, where she cultivated rare blooms year-round. Neighbors reported receiving fresh-cut flowers on their doorsteps on birthdays and holidays, a tradition Ms. Voss maintained for over 40 years. The article concluded with a quote from the building manager at the time. She died peacefully in her sleep, but we'll all miss those flowers on our pillows in the morning. She had a way of knowing when someone needed cheering up. Apartment 4B, the one directly above mine, the one I'd been warned not to visit. That night, I barely slept. Every creak of the old building, the groan of pipes, the whisper of wind through ill-fitting windows, sounded like footsteps overhead. I lay rigid in bed, staring at the willow-shaped stain on the ceiling, imagining an elderly woman moving silently through the apartment above, snipping blossoms from some impossible garden, descending through floors that shouldn't permit passage, placing flowers on my pillow with hands that no longer existed in the physical world. By 4 a.m., exhaustion overtook fear. I fell into a fitful sleep. I woke to roses. Not a bouquet, a single deep crimson rose, its thorns carefully removed, lying across my pillow like a sacrament. Panic finally broke through my rationalizations. This wasn't a prank. This wasn't coincidence. Something was happening in this apartment, and I needed answers. I dressed quickly and went downstairs to the basement-level office where Diane held court amid stacks of unpaid invoices and broken appliances. She was on the phone when I entered, waving me to a chair without looking up. When she hung up, she lit a cigarette before speaking. Problem with the apartment? Who was Eleanor Voss? I asked directly. Diane's face shuddered instantly. She took a long drag on her cigarette, exhaling smoke toward the water-stained ceiling. Where'd you hear that name? The library archives. She lived in 4B. She died there in 1987. Another drag, a long silence. Good tenant. Paid rent on time for 43 years. Never complained about the roaches or the heat. She stubbed out the cigarette with unnecessary force. What's this about? Flowers keep appearing on my pillow, I said, my voice trembling despite my effort to sound calm. Fresh flowers, every morning, gardenias, lilacs, roses. It's November. Where would they come from? Diane went very still. When she looked at me, her eyes held something I hadn't seen before. Not annoyance or boredom, but genuine fear. You didn't go up there, did you? To 4B? No, you said not to. Good. She stood up, walked to a filing cabinet, and rummaged through a drawer before producing a yellowed key attached to a wooden tag marked 4B. I shouldn't do this. Building code violation. Stairs are unsafe. She handed me the key. Her fingers were cold. But if you're getting flowers, you should see for yourself. Maybe it'll stop if you understand. The staircase to the 4th floor was narrow and steep, the banister loose in my grip. The door to 4B stood at the end of a short hallway, its paint blistered and peeling. The key turned with a gritty resistance, the lock protesting decades of disuse. When I pushed the door open, the scent hit me first. Not decay or dust, but the overwhelming perfume of 1,000 blooms in full blossom. Apartment 4B was not empty. It was a garden. Every surface bloomed with impossible life. Vines cascaded from the ceiling fixtures, heavy with jasmine and honeysuckle. Roses climbed the walls in riotous profusion, their thorns snagging on faded wallpaper. Orchids spilled from cracked teacups on the mantelpiece. Lilies nodded their heavy heads in corners where floorboards had rotted away to reveal rich, dark soil beneath. The air hummed with the sound of bees in November inside a sealed apartment, and the light filtering through the grimy windows seemed to carry a golden pollen dust that settled on my skin like blessing. But beneath the beauty lay tragedy. In the center of the main room stood a 4-poster bed, its canopy draped with wisteria. And on that bed, propped against pillows, sprouting tiny violets from their seams, sat a skeleton, not scattered or disturbed, arranged with care, the bones still connected by desiccated ligaments, wearing the tattered remains of a floral print dress. The skull rested at a gentle angle, empty sockets gazing toward the ceiling where a magnificent wisteria vine bloomed with impossible purple clusters. In the bony fingers of the right hand rested a pair of pruning shears, their blades still sharp. I stumbled backward, bile rising in my throat. This was Eleanor Voss. She hadn't been discovered by her nephew after a week. She'd been here for 35 years, her body becoming part of the ecosystem she'd cultivated, her bones feeding the roots of the garden she'd refused to abandon even in death. And then I saw the staircase. In the corner of the room, nearly hidden by cascading trumpet vines, a narrow servant stairway spiraled upward through a hole in the ceiling, toward the roof, toward the legendary rooftop garden the newspaper article had mentioned. But as I stared, I realized the truth. The garden wasn't just on the roof. It was everywhere. It had grown downward through floorboards, upward through plaster, sideways through walls. It had consumed this apartment entirely, and its roots surely extended into mine below, into the very ceiling above my bed, where the willow-shaped stain bloomed like a map of its subterranean spread. I fled 4B without touching anything locking the door behind me and dropping the key into the mail slot of Diane's office on my way out. I didn't return to my apartment until nightfall, my hands still trembling, my mind reeling with what I'd witnessed. I considered packing my bags and leaving immediately, but where would I go? I had no money for another security deposit, no friends with spare rooms. And beneath the terror lurked a strange, unsettling curiosity. Why me? Why these particular flowers? Why the careful placement on my pillow, never on the floor or nightstand, always precisely where my head had rested? That night, I decided to stay awake. I dragged my mattress into the living room as far from the bedroom as possible, and settled in with a book and a pot of strong coffee. Midnight passed. 1 a.m. 2 a.m. The building settled around me with its usual symphony of creaks and sighs. At 3:17 a.m. I heard it, a soft, rhythmic sound from the bedroom. Not footsteps, something gentler, the whisper of petals brushing against cotton, the faint snip of shears. I didn't move, I barely breathed. The sound lasted perhaps 30 seconds, then ceased. Silence returned, deeper than before. I waited until dawn painted the fire escapes outside my window in shades of rose and gold, before creeping toward the bedroom doorway. I stood there for a full minute, gathering courage, before stepping inside. The mattress had been moved back to its original position beneath the willow stain, and on the pillow rested a single sprig of rosemary, its needles impossibly green and fragrant, a herb of remembrance. I broke down then, not from fear, but from the unbearable tenderness of it. This wasn't a haunting meant to terrify. It was a ritual of care. Eleanor Voss, in her decades of solitude, had made it her purpose to bring beauty to the lives of those around her. Death had not ended that purpose. It had merely transformed its method. The flowers weren't a threat. They were a gift, a lonely ghost's attempt at connection. The next day, I returned to the library. I spent hours digging through archives, piecing together Eleanor's life from obituaries, society pages, and botanical society newsletters. She'd been a respected botanist who'd published 3 books on heirloom roses before retiring in 1965. She'd never married, no children. Her only living relative, the nephew mentioned in the 1987 article, had died himself in 2003, according to his own obituary. She lived alone in 4B for nearly 60 years, her world shrinking to the dimensions of her apartment and rooftop garden until the two became indistinguishable. I also found her final publication, a self-published chapbook from 1986 titled The Language of Forgotten Blooms, a guide to the symbolic meanings of flowers no longer commonly cultivated. I photocopied the relevant pages: gardenias for secret love, lilacs for first emotions of love, roses for deep devotion, rosemary for remembrance. Each flower left on my pillow carried a specific message. But what was she trying to tell me? That evening I made a decision. I went to the grocery store and bought the most beautiful bouquet I could afford. 12 white stargazer lilies, their petals speckled with crimson, their scent powerful enough to fill a room. I carried them upstairs, my heart pounding with a mixture of fear and determination. In my apartment, I arranged them carefully in a vase I'd found at a thrift store, then carried the vase into the bedroom and placed it directly beneath the willow-shaped stain on the ceiling. "Thank you," I whispered to the empty room, "for the flowers, for remembering me. I went to bed that night with the vase on my nightstand, the lily's perfume mingling with the lingering scent of rosemary. I fell asleep almost immediately, exhausted from days of anxiety. I woke to silence. No flowers on my pillow, no scent of blossoms beyond the lilies I'd placed myself. For a moment, relief flooded me. Perhaps my gesture had been understood. Perhaps the haunting was over. But as I sat up, I noticed something different about the ceiling stain. The willow branches seemed darker, more defined, and at the base of the trunk, where previously there had been only a vague smudge of discoloration, now appeared two distinct shapes. The delicate outline of pruning shears crossed with a trowel. That day, I didn't look for work. I went to a garden center instead and bought potting soil, seeds, and a small terracotta pot. That evening, I planted forget-me-nots on my windowsill, the flower of true love and memories, and watered them carefully before placing the pot beneath the willow stain. The next morning, no flowers appeared on my pillow, but when I looked up at the ceiling, the stain had changed again. The willow now bore tiny buds along its branches, dozens of minute protrusions that hadn't been there before, each one the precise shape of a flower bud waiting to open. A pattern emerged over the following weeks. I would leave offerings, a new plant on the windowsill, a packet of seeds tucked into the vase, once a small watering can I'd found at a flea market. And each night the willow stain would respond, its branches growing more intricate, its form shifting to incorporate the tools and symbols of gardening. It was a conversation conducted in silence and symbolism, a dialogue between the living and the dead, mediated by the language of blooms. I stopped fearing the flowers. I began to look forward to them, not as supernatural intrusions, but as messages from a lonely soul who had found in me someone willing to listen. One rainy Tuesday evening, as I was repotting a peace lily I'd acquired from a neighbor, I heard it for the first time. A sound that wasn't the whisper of petals or the snip of shears. A voice, faint as breath on glass, coming not from above, but from within the walls themselves. "Your hands!" I froze, trowel hovering over the soil. "Your hands remember the earth," the voice continued, so soft I might have imagined it, like mine did. I didn't speak. I simply held my breath and listened. "Show me," the voice whispered. "Show me you remember." Trembling, I pressed my palms into the fresh potting soil, feeling its cool dampness seep between my fingers. I worked the soil gently around the peace lily's roots, patting it firm, my movements slow and deliberate. When I finished, I wiped my hands on a towel and looked up at the ceiling. The willow stain had transformed completely. Where before there had been only branches, now hung hundreds of tiny blossoms, each one a perfect replica of the flowers that had appeared on my pillow these past weeks. Gardenias, lilacs, roses, rosemary, and in the center of the canopy, a single white camellia bloomed larger than the rest, its petals seeming to pulse with a soft inner light. That night, for the first time, I dreamed of her, not as a skeleton in a floral dress, but as she must have been in life. An elderly woman with kind eyes and soil-stained hands, kneeling in a rooftop garden under a sky full of stars. She wasn't speaking to me, but working silently among her plants, her movements graceful and sure. And as I watched, she turned and looked directly at me, not with the empty sockets of a skull, but with eyes full of warmth and recognition. She pointed to a patch of bare earth beside her, then patted the soil twice, a clear invitation. I woke with tears on my cheeks and the scent of night-blooming jasmine thick in the air. On my pillow rested not a flower, but a single seed packet. I picked it up with trembling hands. The label was handwritten in elegant script, Eleanor's Moonflowers, blooms only under starlight. The next evening, as twilight settled over the city, I carried a small trowel and the seed packet up to the roof. The door was unlocked, had been all along, I realized, and the stairs groaned under my weight, but held firm. The rooftop was not the overgrown jungle I'd imagined from 4B's interior. It was a ruin. Cracked concrete, rusted railings, a few stubborn weeds pushing through fissures in the pavement. No garden remained, no trace of the paradise Eleanor Voss had cultivated for 60 years. But in the center of the roof, directly above my bedroom, the concrete had split open in a perfect circle 6 feet across. And from that fissure grew a single plant, a vine with heart-shaped leaves and tightly furled buds the color of pearl. Moonflowers, Eleanor's moonflowers. I knelt beside the plant as true darkness fell. One by one, the buds began to unfurl, their petals opening with an almost audible sigh to reveal blossoms of impossible whiteness that seemed to drink the starlight and glow with their own radiance. And as I watched them bloom, I felt a presence settle beside me, not cold or menacing, but warm as sunlight on soil. I didn't turn to look. I simply sat there in the company of a ghost, both of us gazing at flowers that bloomed only for those who remembered how to see them. The flowers on my pillow stopped after that night. The haunting, if that's what it ever was, had reached its purpose. But sometimes, on clear nights when I can't sleep, I climb to the roof and sit beside the moonflowers as they open beneath the stars. And if I listen closely, I can hear it, the soft whisper of petals in the wind that sounds almost like a voice saying, "Thank you." The building manager never asks why I spend so much time on the roof. Diane retired last spring, and the new manager doesn't care as long as the rent clears. The other tenants occasionally leave small offerings on their windowsills, a packet of seeds, a watering can left out after rain, and sometimes in the morning they find a single perfect bloom waiting for them. A silent exchange, a tradition renewed. I still live in 3B. I've hung shelves on the bedroom wall beneath the willow stain, filling them with books on botany and horticulture. The stain itself has faded over the years, its branches softening into abstraction until only I can still see the shape of the tree within the discoloration. But on certain mornings, when the light strikes the ceiling at just the right angle, I can still make out the faint impression of pruning shears crossed with a trowel, and sometimes, if I look very closely, the delicate outline of 2 figures kneeling side by side in a garden that exists nowhere and everywhere at once. Last week, a young couple moved into 2B below me. The woman is an artist. The man teaches poetry at the community college. They seem kind, lonely in the particular way of newcomers to a city that doesn't yet know their names. This morning, as I was leaving for work, I saw her standing in the hallway looking lost, a single suitcase at her feet, while her partner sorted through a box of kitchenware inside their apartment. I went upstairs to my apartment, selected a cutting from the peace lily that now thrives on my windowsill, and placed it in a small pot with fresh soil. I carried it down to 2B and knocked softly on their door. When she opened it, her eyes red-rimmed with exhaustion and uncertainty, I simply handed her the plant. "For your windowsill," I said. "It likes the morning light." She took it with trembling hands, tears welling in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "How did you know I needed this?" I didn't answer. I just smiled and walked away, already thinking about the seed packets I'd bought yesterday. Zinnias for friendship, lavender for devotion, sunflowers for adoration, small offerings, simple gestures, the language of blooms passed down through generations of lonely souls learning to reach across the chasms that separate us. Some ghosts don't rattle chains or whisper threats in the dark. Some simply leave flowers on your pillow to remind you that beauty persists. That connection is possible even across the greatest divides. That no one need remain alone if someone is willing to plant seeds in the dark and wait for them to bloom. And sometimes, in the quiet hours before dawn, when the moonflowers on the roof are closed tight against the coming light, I like to imagine Eleanor Voss, not as a skeleton in a floral dress, but as she is now, a presence woven into the very fabric of this building, her hands still tending the garden she loved, her heart still reaching out through roots and stems and petals to touch the lives of those who remember how to receive a gift left gently on a pillow in the night. The night grows deeper as we leave this story behind and move on to the next. The portrait in the attic changes its expression every night. The inheritance came with keys and caveats. My great-aunt Eleanor's lawyer handed me the deed to Willowwood House, a sprawling shingled Victorian on the edge of a dying New England town, with a handshake that lingered a second too long. "She left it to you specifically," he said, his voice dry as attic dust. "Said you were the only one who'd understand its moods." He wouldn't elaborate, just slid a rusted key across his desk. "The attic door sticks. Use the spare key for it, and whatever you do, don't disturb the portrait on the east wall. It's not yours to touch." When I asked why, he simply adjusted his glasses, the lenses flashing opaque. "Some doors," he murmured, "are best left closed." Willowwood smelled of beeswax and buried time. Sunlight strained through grimy leaded windows, illuminating dust motes dancing above threadbare Persian rugs and velvet drapes heavy with mildew. The air hung still and cold even in late September, carrying the faint, sweet decay of dried roses and old paper. Eleanor had lived alone for 40 years after my grandfather's death, and the silence had seeped into the floorboards, the wainscoting, the very marrow of the house. I moved in on a Tuesday, hauling boxes of my meager belongings up the creaking front stairs. The realtor had mentioned the attic was full of character. What she didn't mention was the door. It was at the end of the second-floor hallway, taller than the others, made of dark, unvarnished oak. No knob, just a tarnished iron latch. The key the lawyer gave me fit stiffly. When I turned it, the lock released with a groan like a stone grinding over bone. The door swung inward slowly, revealing steep, narrow stairs vanishing into gloom. A wave of cold air rushed out, carrying the sharp, acrid scent of oil paint and turpentine, utterly alien in the dust-thick stillness of the rest of the house. I flicked on the bare bulb dangling from the rafters. Weak light spilled over stacks of steamer trunks, draped sheet-covered furniture, and mountains of yellowed newspapers. And there, on the east wall, covered by a heavy canvas drop cloth, was the portrait. I didn't touch it, not that first day. I just stood at the top of the stairs, the cold seeping through my sweater, listening to the silence. It wasn't empty silence. It was watchful. That night, I woke at 3:17 a.m. to the sound of scratching, not mice, deliberate, rhythmic, like fingernails dragging slowly down wood. It came from above, from the attic. I lay frozen, listening until dawn painted the ceiling pale gray. The scratching stopped exactly as the first light touched the window. The next afternoon, curiosity overpowered caution. I climbed the attic stairs, the cold deepening with each step. I stood before the draped portrait, heart pounding. It's just a painting, I told myself. Aunt Eleanor's odd taste. I gripped the edge of the canvas. Cloth. It felt unnaturally heavy, damp with cold. I yanked it down. The frame was ornate, tarnished silver. The painting itself was arresting. A woman in a high-collared Edwardian gown, seated in a carved wooden chair. Late 20s, maybe. Dark hair pulled severely back, eyes wide set, intelligent, but holding a sadness that seemed to bleed through the varnish. Her lips were pressed in a neutral line. The background was a blurred landscape of willow trees weeping into a twilight lake. The artist's signature was smudged in the corner. A. Thorne, 1898 Os. I studied it for 10 minutes, noting the meticulous brushstrokes, the lifelike sheen on the woman's skin. Nothing unusual, just an old portrait. I recovered it with the drop cloth, the smell of turpentine sharp in my nostrils, and went downstairs. I woke the next night to the scratching again, but this time, beneath it, a sound that stopped my breath. A low, muffled sob. Not human, not animal. A vibration in the air, itself, like wood, weeping. I didn't go upstairs. I locked my bedroom door and pressed my ear to the floorboards until dawn. In the morning, I climbed back to the attic. The drop cloth lay crumpled on the floor. The portrait was uncovered. I stared. The woman's expression had changed. Her lips were no longer neutral. They curved upward at the corners, a faint, almost imperceptible smile, but her eyes, they were wider, brighter, and filled with a quiet, unnerving hunger. I backed down the stairs, cold sweat on my neck. Impossible. Must have knocked the cloth off last time. Trick of the light. But the turpentine smell was stronger now, clinging to my clothes. The changes escalated. Night after night, I'd find the drop cloth discarded, the portrait uncovered, its expression shifting with the moon. Tuesday, tears like liquid pearls tracing paths down her cheeks, her mouth open in a silent wail. Wednesday, eyes narrowed in suspicion, head tilted as if listening. Thursday, a full, radiant smile that didn't touch her cold, black pupils. Friday, lips drawn back in a snarl, revealing just the hint of sharp, yellowed teeth. Each time, the turpentine scent grew thicker, sharper, until it coated my tongue. Each time, the cold in the attic deepened, frosting the dust on the trunks. I tried recovering it. I pinned the drop cloth down with thumbtacks. I wedged a chair under the attic door handle. Nothing worked. Every morning, the cloth was on the floor. The chair was back in the corner. The portrait was uncovered. Watching, waiting, I researched. The town library's local history section held a brittle newspaper clipping from October 3rd, 1898. Local artist Alastair Thorne commits suicide after wife's mysterious disappearance. The article was brief. Thorne, a respected portraitist, had reported his wife, Clara, missing, after she failed to return from a walk along Willowwood Lake. Weeks later, Thorne was found in his studio, wrists slit, surrounded by half-finished portraits of Clara, all showing her with expressions of terror. The police suspected foul play but found no body. The case went cold. The house, Willowwood, was sold. Clara Thorne. The name echoed in the silent house. I stared at the portrait's latest change. Last night, her hand had lifted from her lap. One pale finger pointed directly at the attic stairs. That night, the scratching stopped. Instead, I heard singing. A woman's voice, clear and sweet as a bell, drifting down the hallway. It was an old lullaby my mother used to sing. "Hush now, baby. Don't say a word. Papa's gonna buy you a mockingbird." But the words were twisted, slowed, the melody souring into something mournful and wrong. I pressed my palms over my ears, but the voice wasn't outside. It was inside my head. Cold seeped under my bedroom door, pooling around my feet like water. The singing grew louder, closer. Then, abruptly, silence. I found the message at dawn, scrawled in what looked like dried mud on my bathroom mirror. "Let me out." She didn't jump. Panic became my constant companion. I stopped sleeping. I taped the attic door shut. I bought sage and burned it until my eyes watered, chanting prayers I didn't believe in. The house absorbed it all. The cold spots multiplied. Drawers opened by themselves. The lullaby hummed in the walls. And every morning the attic door was unlocked, the tape torn cleanly aside, the portrait uncovered, Clara's expression now one of desperate pleading, tears streaking the dusty varnish. Her pointing finger wasn't aimed at the stairs anymore. It pointed straight at me. I called the lawyer. He refused to speak of Clara Thorne. "Burn the portrait," he hissed down the phone, his voice tight with fear. "Burn it and scatter the ashes in the lake. Don't look back." When I asked why he hadn't done it himself, he went silent for a long moment. "I tried," he whispered, 20 years ago. The fire wouldn't take. The frame turned black, but the canvas, it stayed clean. And after the knocking started in my walls, I moved 3 times. It always finds me. I gave you the house to save myself. Forgive me." He hung up. That night, the power died. Not just in the house, in the whole street. Moonlight bled through my window, painting the room in shades of bone. The singing started again, louder now, coming from the hallway, not the lullaby. A new song, a dirge. Heavy footsteps climbed the stairs, slow, deliberate, too heavy for a woman. Thud, 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 stopping outside my door. The knob rattled, not violently, patiently, testing. I backed into the corner, clutching a fireplace poker, tears freezing on my cheeks. The cold radiating from under the door was arctic. The singing shifted, Clara's voice now layered with another, a man's voice, guttural, furious. "Mine," it growled beneath her melody. "Always mine. The lake took one, but the house keeps the other. Come out, little bird. Let Papa see you." The door handle turned. The lock held, for now. But the wood around it began to splinter. Fine cracks spiderwebbed across the surface. Moonlight caught the edge of a shadow beneath the door. A man's boot, polished and black, resting on the threshold. The singing swelled. Clara's voice now a scream inside my skull. "He didn't let me jump. He pushed. He painted me while I screamed." I ran, not to the front door. The shadow was there too, tall and broad-shouldered, blocking the exit. I ran up to the attic, It was the only door not yet breached. I threw the latch open, stumbling up the icy stairs, slamming the door behind me. I jammed the spare key into the lock, twisting it hard. Below, the splintering stopped. The singing ceased. An unnatural silence fell. I stood in the attic's freezing dark, breathing hard. Moonlight streamed through the dormer window, illuminating the uncovered portrait. Clara's face was transformed. No sorrow, no fear, pure, radiant fury. Her eyes blazed like coals. Her mouth was open in a silent roar, and her hand wasn't pointing anymore. Both arms were outstretched, palms upturned, as if pushing against an invisible barrier. The turpentine smell was suffocating. Paint fumes stung my eyes. Then I saw it. Behind her, in the painted willow trees, the background had changed. No longer a lake, a dark, churning hole in the earth, ringed with grasping skeletal hands, and standing at its edge, half fused with the shadows, was a man in a painter's smock. Alistair Thorne. His face was a rictus of rage, one hand gripping Clara's wrist in the painting, the other holding a palette knife, dripping black paint. But his eyes, they weren't fixed on Clara. They were staring out of the canvas, staring directly at me. The attic door shuddered, not from the latch, from the inside. Something heavy slammed against it once, twice. Wood cracked. Moonlight caught the edge of a black boot pressing through the splintered gap. Clara's painted eyes flicked toward the door. Her expression shifted again, not fear, but resolve. She turned fully toward the breach, her outstretched hands now aimed at the intruder. The turpentine smell turned acrid, burning. The air crackled. Frost spread rapidly across the floorboards toward the door, crawling up the splintering wood. I understood then. She wasn't trapped in the portrait. She was trapped guarding it, keeping him contained. The scratches, the sobs, the changing expressions, they weren't hauntings. They were battles. Every night Alistair fought to break free. Every night Clara held him back. But she was weakening. And my grief, my loneliness after my mother's death, my raw, open sorrow when I first moved in, had been a feast for him. He'd smelled it like blood and water. He'd been using me to erode her hold. The lullaby wasn't just Clara's voice. It was his lure, mimicking the comfort I craved, drawing me closer to the door he needed me to open. The door exploded inward. Alistair stood in the frame, not a ghost, but a thing of shadow and dried paint. His form flickered, peeling like old wallpaper, revealing glimpses of bone and river silt beneath. His eyes were pits of darkness. In his hand, the palette knife gleamed. He didn't look at me. His gaze was fixed on Clara's portrait, on the hole in the painted earth. "Mine," he rasped, the sound like gravel in a tin can. "Time to come home, my sweet." He stepped forward. Clara's painted form rippled. Her outstretched hands glowed with a faint, silvery light. Frost shot from her fingertips, encasing Alistair's boots in ice. He snarled, shaking it off, advancing. The temperature plummeted. My breath fogged thickly. The painting surface began to bubble, the varnish cracking like ice on a pond. I didn't think. I ran not away, but toward the portrait, toward Clara. I pressed my palms flat against the cold canvas, right over her heart. "I'm sorry," I sobbed, the words ripped from me. "I'm so sorry for your pain. I'm sorry I let him use mine. You don't have to hold him alone anymore. Let go. Let go." A shock wave of cold tore through me, not painful, cleansing. Clara's painted eyes met mine. For a heartbeat, I saw not pigment and canvas, but a woman real, terrified, unbearably sad. Then her expression softened, not into peace, into release. She lowered her hands. Alistair roared, lunging for the painting. But Clara stepped out of the frame, not as a ghost, as a ripple of moonlight and frost. She flowed between Alistair and the portrait, her form shimmering, insubstantial, yet radiating fierce warmth. She didn't fight him. She embraced him, her arms wrapped around his shadowy form. He struggled, snarling, the palette knife plunging into her light, but it passed through, harmless. "No more, Alistair," her voice whispered, not in my ears, but in my bones. No more pain, no more painting the dark. They began to dissolve, not fading, unmaking. Alistair's rage turned to confusion, then a childlike sob as the shadows peeled away, revealing the broken man beneath. Clara's light grew brighter, warmer, pulling him into its glow. The hole in the painted landscape sealed itself, replaced by the willow trees and the calm, moonlit lake. The turpentine smell vanished, replaced by the scent of dew on grass. As they faded, Clara turned her head toward me. One last look, not sadness, gratitude. Then, with a sound like a sigh through willow branches, they were gone. Silence. The attic was just an attic again. Dusty, cold, but naturally so. Dawn light seeped through the dormer window, illuminating the portrait on the east wall. It showed Clara Thorne seated calmly in her chair. Her expression was serene, peaceful. Her hands rested gently in her lap. The background was a perfect, undisturbed lake at twilight. The signature in the corner was clear now. Clara Thorne, 1901. I took the portrait down, not to destroy it, to hang it in the sunniest room in the house, the morning room overlooking the garden. I cleaned the glass, polished the frame. Every day I sit with my coffee beneath it, watching the light shift across Clara's face. She never changes now. She just is, calm, present. The house is quiet, truly quiet. The cold spots are gone, the scratching, the singing, the feeling of being watched. They vanished. But sometimes, on still evenings when the willows sway by the lake, I catch a scent on the breeze, not turpentine, wild roses. And if I listen very closely, beneath the wind and the leaves, I hear two voices, not singing, just breathing, together. I leave the attic door unlocked now, but I never go up there. Some doors, I've learned, are best left closed, and some portraits aren't meant to be kept in the dark. Clara earned her peace. I won't disturb it, but on the hardest days, when grief for my mother feels like a stone in my chest, I still press my palm to the glass of her portrait. Warmth always blooms beneath my fingers, and in the quiet, I swear I feel the faintest pressure against my hand, like a thank you, like a promise. You're not alone. The house holds its breath. The willows whisper. And for the first time since I arrived, I believe it. That's where this tale ends. Now, another waits just beyond the shadows. The Archive of the Unclaimed. I am writing this statement on a piece of paper I stole from the lobby of a police station in Nebraska. I don't live in Nebraska. I don't know anyone in Nebraska. But I drove until my car ran out of gas, and this is where I stopped. My hands are stained black. No matter how much I scrub them with industrial soap, the blackness doesn't come off. It's not ink. It's not oil. It's underneath the skin. If you are reading this, do not take the job at the Sub-Level 4 storage facility in Detroit. If you see an ad on a telephone pole or a Craigslist post asking for a night archivist, with a pay rate of $40 an hour. Cash. Close your eyes. Walk away. Forget you ever saw it. I was 26 years old. I was a dropout with a mountain of debt and a landlord who liked to bang on my door at 6 a.m. asking for rent money I didn't have. I was desperate. That is the word that defines everyone who ends up at the archive. Desperation. I met the hiring manager, a man named Mr. Calloway, in a portable office trailer sitting in the middle of a fenced-off concrete lot. He was a small man, bald with glasses so thick his eyes looked like tiny black beads swimming in water. He didn't ask for a resume. He didn't ask for a background check. "Can you lift 50 pounds?" he asked. His voice was dry like sandpaper rubbing together. "Yes," I said. "Are you claustrophobic?" "No." "Do you have family that checks on you daily?" "No," I lied. I had a mom in Ohio, but we hadn't talked in months. "Good," Calloway said. He stamped a piece of paper. "You start tonight, 8 p.m. to 4 a.m. Your job is simple. You walk the rows. You check for moisture. You check for structural integrity of the boxes. And you never, under any circumstances, open a box marked with a red tag." "What's in the boxes with red tags?" I asked. Calloway looked up. His beady eyes went cold. "Personal effects of the unclaimed. Things the state doesn't know what to do with, but can't destroy. Just check the humidity, kid. Don't be a hero." The facility wasn't a building. It was a hole. To get to work, I had to take a freight elevator that rattled and screamed as it descended. It took 3 full minutes to get to the bottom, sub-level 4. It was deep enough that the air felt heavy. It pressed against your eardrums. It smelled of old paper, mildew, and something sharp and metallic, like pennies that had been soaking in vinegar. The archive was massive. It was a concrete cavern filled with endless rows of metal shelving. The shelves went up 20 feet, reaching the dark ceiling where flickering fluorescent tube lights buzzed like dying insects. The rows stretched back so far you couldn't see the end. It was a labyrinth of cardboard and steel. My station was a small desk near the elevator. I had a flashlight, a clipboard, and a radio that only received static. The first week was agonizingly boring. I walked the rows. My footsteps echoed, creating a slap, slap, slap sound that bounced off the concrete walls. I shined my light on thousands of boxes. Most were white bankers' boxes with boring labels. Tax records 1998, city plan and debt, court transcripts. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that hurts. If I stopped walking, I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. I could hear the hum of the ventilation system, which sounded like a giant beast breathing in its sleep. The weirdness started on the second Monday. I was in row 40, a section called the Deep Stacks. This was where the older boxes were. The air was colder back there. The lights were dimmer. I was checking a shelf when I heard it. Scritch, scritch, scritch. It sounded like a mouse scratching at cardboard. "Great," I muttered. "Rats." I took my flashlight and followed the sound. It was coming from a box on the bottom shelf. It was an old box, brown and sagging. It had a red tag. The label on the tag was handwritten in faded black marker. Item, Gas 8490. Unknown. Origin, recovered from Site B. I crouched down. The scratching was coming from inside the box. Scritch, scritched. Then it stopped. "Hello?" I whispered. I felt stupid talking to a box. A voice whispered back. It wasn't a rat. It was a human voice, a woman's voice. "It's so tight," she whispered. "My fingers are breaking." I fell backward, landing hard on the concrete. I scrambled away, shining my light on the box. It sat there, motionless. "Who's there?" I shouted. My voice cracked. Silence. I stood up, shaking. I told myself it was the acoustics, the ventilation fans playing tricks on my tired brain. I marked check for rodents on my clipboard and practically ran back to my desk. I didn't tell Calloway. I needed the money. I couldn't lose this job over a hallucination. 3 nights later, the leaking started. I was doing my rounds in row 12. I smelled it before I saw it. It smelled like rotten lilacs and burnt hair. It was a thick, cloying scent that coated the back of my throat. I followed the smell to a shelf at eye level. There was a box with a red tag. Label, family case. 102, evidence. A black liquid was oozing out of the bottom corner of the box. It wasn't water. It was thick, viscous, like tar or molasses. It dripped onto the floor with a heavy plop, plop, plop. I shone my flashlight on the puddle. The black liquid was moving. It wasn't flowing downhill. It was swirling, bubbling, as if it was boiling, but the room was freezing cold. As I watched, the puddle stretched out a thin tendril, like a finger, reaching toward the toe of my boot. I stepped back. Nope, 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 nope. I grabbed my radio. "Calloway? Mr. Calloway, are you there?" Static. I walked back to the desk to use the landline phone. It was dead. No dial tone, just a low, rhythmic thumping sound on the line, like a heartbeat. I went back to row 12 with a roll of duct tape. I don't know why. I thought maybe I could seal the box. When I got back to row 12, the box was gone. The shelf was empty. The puddle of black slime was gone. The floor was dry. I checked the row number. Row 12. I was sure of it. Then I looked at the shelf above. The box was there. It had moved up one shelf. I hadn't touched it. There was no one else in the facility. The elevator hadn't moved. I stared at the box. The black liquid was now seeping through the cardboard faster, soaking the bottom. "Why did you move?" I whispered. The box vibrated. It shook violently, rattling against the metal shelf. Then a sound came from inside. Not a whisper this time, a scream. It was a muffled, high-pitched scream of absolute agony. It sounded like a man being crushed in a compactor. "Let me out!" The scream was so loud it shook dust from the ceiling. I dropped my flashlight. Darkness swallowed the row. I scrambled on the floor, feeling for the metal cylinder. My hand brushed against something wet, something sticky. I recoiled. I found the light and clicked it on. The black slime was on my hand. It burned. It felt like acid. I wiped it on my pants, panicking. The screaming stopped. The box sat there, silent. I ran. I ran all the way to the elevator and hit the button. I stood there shivering, waiting for the slow, agonizing descent of the cage. When it finally arrived, I took it up to the surface and sat in my car until sunrise. I should have quit then. I really should have. But I checked my bank account balance on my phone. Negative $40. Rent was due in 2 days. I went back. God help me, I went back. That was night 7, the last night. When I arrived, Calloway wasn't in the trailer. The door was unlocked. His coffee cup was on the desk, mold growing in the cold liquid. A note was taped to the monitor. "Check row 99. Urgent!" I'd never been to row 99. The facility supposedly ended at row 80. I took the elevator down. The air was different tonight. It was hot, humid. The smell of rotten lilacs was everywhere, overpowering. I walked past rows 10, 20, 50. The lights were buzzing louder, popping and flickering. Shadows seemed to dance in the corners of my vision. I reached row 80. Behind it, there was a heavy plastic tarp hanging from the ceiling, painted with a warning, "Do not enter. Structural instability." I pulled the tarp back. There was a tunnel. It wasn't concrete anymore. The walls were rough-hewn rock, braced with old rotting wood beams. Shelves had been hammered directly into the rock. This was row 99. The boxes here weren't cardboard. They were wooden crates bound in chains. Some were metal safes. All of them had red tags. But the tags didn't have numbers anymore. They had names: Allison, Michael, the Traveler, Subject 4, and they were all leaking. The floor of the tunnel was covered in inches of the black sludge. It rippled like a dark ocean. I stepped onto a wooden pallet to keep my boots dry. "Hello?" I called out. "Mr. Calloway?" I heard a splashing sound further down the tunnel. I shone my light. Mr. Calloway was standing at the end of the tunnel, facing the wall. He was standing shin-deep in the black slime. "Mr. Calloway," I said, stepping closer, "we need to get out of here. It's flooding." Calloway didn't turn around, but he spoke. "It's not flooding, Jack. It's emptying." He knew my name. I had never told him my name. "What do you mean?" I asked. Calloway turned around slowly. My stomach dropped. His eyes were gone. The sockets were filled with the black sludge. It poured down his cheeks like tears. His mouth was open in a rictus grin, and the sludge was bubbling up from his throat, spilling over his lips. "They aren't personal effects, Jack," Calloway gurgled. The voice sounded wet, thick. "They are the discarded, the memories people cut out, the sins cities want to bury, and they are so hungry." Calloway took a step toward me. The black sludge on the floor rose up. It wasn't liquid. It was a hive mind. It formed shapes, hands. Hundreds of black, oily hands rising from the muck, grasping at the air. "Join the archive," Calloway said. He spread his arms. The hands grabbed his legs. They pulled. Calloway didn't scream. He laughed. He laughed as the sludge pulled him down. He sank like he was in quicksand. The blackness swallowed his waist, his chest, his neck. His head remained above the surface for a moment. "Check the box, Jack," he whispered. "Your box." Then he was gone. I backed away, terrified. The sludge was rushing toward me, a tidal wave of oil and hate. I turned to run, but I slipped. I fell face first onto a wooden crate. My light shined on the label, Jackson Miller, the night archivist. It was my name. It was my box, and it was shaking. Something inside was pounding on the wood. Thump, thump, thump. "Let me out!" A voice screamed from inside the box. It was my voice. It was me inside the box. I stared at it, paralyzed. How could I be in the box if I was standing here? The lid of the crate began to pry open. Black fingers curled over the edge. A face pushed its way out. It was my face, but it was made of the black slime. It had my eyes, my nose, my mouth, but it was melting, shifting. "You're late for your shift," the thing that looked like me hissed. I scrambled backward. The sludge on the floor grabbed my boot. It burned. It felt like it was eating through the leather. I kicked my foot loose, leaving the boot behind. I ran. I ran back through the tunnel, past the tarp, into the concrete section. The archive was alive. Every box in every row was rattling, millions of boxes, a cacophony of scratching, screaming, and crying. The noise was deafening. It sounded like a stadium full of people burning to death. The black liquid was pouring from the shelves, creating waterfalls of slime. I sprinted for the elevator. My sock was soaked in the sludge. My foot felt numb, dead. I reached the elevator. I hit the button. Nothing happened. I hit it again. Come on, come on! I looked back at the rows. A wave of blackness was rushing down the main aisle. At the crest of the wave was Calloway, or what was left of him. His body was fused with others. Faces I didn't know, women, children, men, all screaming in unison. "The Unclaimed!" the collective voice roared. I pried the elevator doors open with my fingers. The car wasn't there. It was still at the top. There was a ladder in the shaft. I didn't hesitate. I jumped for the ladder. I climbed until my muscles screamed. Below me, the sludge filled the elevator shaft. It was rising. I could hear them climbing the ladder behind me, wet, slapping sounds. Slap, slap, slap. "We remember you, Jack," the voices whispered from the dark below. "We have your debt. We have your fear." I reached the top, sub-level 1, then the lobby. I burst out of the shaft door and rolled onto the linoleum floor of the loading dock. It was night outside. The air was cool. I ran to my car. I drove. I didn't look back at the warehouse. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. I drove for 3 days straight. I stole gas. I slept in rest stops for 20 minutes at a time. I thought I escaped, but yesterday I stopped at a gas station to wash my hands. My foot had turned black. The skin was hard, like a shell, and my hands, the stains won't come off. But that's not the worst part. The worst part is what happened an hour ago. I was sitting in this police station lobby trying to work up the courage to turn myself in, to tell them everything. A delivery man walked in. He was carrying a package, a brown cardboard box. He set it on the counter near me. The label on the box caught my eye. Jackson Miller, recovered effects. It had a red tag, and it was leaking. A single drop of black liquid fell from the corner of the box and hit the pristine white floor. Plop! I heard a scratching sound from inside. Scritch, scritch, and then a whisper. "I'm still in here, Jack. You left me in the dark." I stood up and walked out. I left my car. I'm walking now. I'm walking into the cornfields. I can feel the blackness spreading up my leg. It feels cold. It feels heavy. I know what happens when it reaches my heart. I won't die. That would be too easy. I will become a box. And someone, some desperate kid who needs money, is going to be hired to watch me. Please, if you see the ad, if you see the job for the archive, don't let me out. Whatever you do, don't let me out. And with that, this story fades into the dark. Let's quietly step into the next one. I rented a cheap room in an abandoned house at the edge of town. I found the listing at 2 a.m, when everything feels reasonable and nothing feels permanent. The photos were grainy, the description short. Room for rent. Quiet. Cash preferred. The price was less than half of anything else I'd seen. The address was at the far edge of town, where the streetlights thin out and the sidewalks crack and then simply stop. I told myself the cheap rent explained everything. I told myself the pictures looked empty because the owner valued privacy. I told myself I needed a place to sleep, not a place to live. When I drove out there the next afternoon, the sky was low and gray, the kind that presses down on you like a held breath. The house sat back from the road, half hidden by trees that had grown wild and unchecked. It wasn't burned or collapsed. It wasn't obviously ruined. It was just tired. The paint had peeled in long strips, exposing older colors beneath, like layers of old skin. The windows were intact, but dark, as if the light inside had been turned off a long time ago and forgotten. A man answered the door after I knocked twice. He was thin, older than I'd expected, with a face that looked carved instead of aged. He didn't give me his name. He didn't ask for mine. He took the cash, counted it carefully, and handed me a key that felt warm, as if it had been in his pocket for a long time. "Room's upstairs," he said. "Second door on the left. Don't use the back hallway." I asked why. He looked past me down the road and said, "It doesn't go where you think." That should have been the moment I left. Instead, I nodded like I understood, like it was a joke, like everything was normal. Inside, the house smelled of dust and something faintly sweet, like old flowers pressed between the pages. The floors creaked under my shoes, not sharply, but with a long, tired groan, as if the house needed time to acknowledge each step. The air was cool, despite the broken thermostat on the wall. No pictures hung anywhere, no mirrors. The walls were bare, marked only by faint outlines where something had once been and then removed. My room was exactly what the listing promised. A bed, a dresser, a single lamp. The window faced the trees, their branches close enough to brush the glass when the wind picked up. The door locked, the walls were thin. That first night, I slept hard. The kind of sleep that comes from exhaustion and relief. I didn't dream. I didn't move. I woke up in the dark with the sense that something had changed. It took me a few seconds to realize what it was. The house was breathing, not like pipes knocking or wood settling. This was slower, a deep, rhythmic sound rising and falling as if the structure itself had lungs. I lay still, listening. With each breath, the air in my room seemed to shift just slightly, like a tide pulling back and forth. I told myself it was the wind. The trees were close. Old houses make noises. Then I heard footsteps in the hallway. They were soft, careful, bare feet by the sound of it. Someone walking slowly, stopping every few steps, then continuing. The steps reached my door and paused. I held my breath. The handle didn't move. Whoever it was stood there for a long moment, close enough that I could hear a faint, wet sound, like someone breathing through their mouth. Then the footsteps moved on, down the hall, toward the stairs. In the morning, the house was quiet and ordinary again. The breathing was gone. The air smelled like dust and nothing else. I told myself I'd imagined it. I went to work. I came back that evening with groceries and a determination not to let my nerves get the better of me. That night, the footsteps returned. This time, there were more of them. They didn't move like people going somewhere. They wandered. They doubled back. Sometimes they stopped outside my door. Sometimes they gathered near the top of the stairs, a cluster of soft sounds overlapping and separating again. I pressed my ear to the wall and heard whispering, not words, just breath shaped into something that almost meant something. A chorus of near sounds, like a language spoken underwater. On the third night, I started hearing it during the day. A faint scratching behind the walls, like fingernails dragging slowly across wood. It followed me from room to room. When I stood still, it stopped. When I moved, it resumed, keeping pace. I tried to find the landlord. His room at the end of the hall was locked. I knocked. No answer. I listened at the door and heard nothing at all, not even breathing. That night, I dreamed I was standing in the back hallway. In the dream, The hallway was longer than it should have been. The walls bowed inward, the ceiling low enough that I had to duck. Doors lined both sides, each one slightly ajar, each one breathing softly. I walked past them, drawn forward by something I couldn't see. At the end of the hallway was a door without a handle. I woke up standing in my room, my hand pressed flat against the wall, right where the scratching usually came from. The wall was warm. I pulled my hand away and stared at my palm. For a second, I could swear there was a faint pattern there, like the impression of veins that weren't mine. I stopped sleeping after that. When you don't sleep, everything stretches. Time becomes thick and sticky. Sounds get louder. Shadows feel heavier. The house took advantage of that. It started doing things when I was tired enough to doubt myself. Doors I locked would be open in the morning. Objects would be moved just slightly, never enough to be obvious, but enough that I noticed. The dresser drawer would be pulled out an inch. The lamp would be turned to face the wall. The breathing came back, stronger now. It seemed to come from everywhere at once, a slow inhalation that made the walls flex, followed by an exhale that rattled. The windows. One night, the footsteps didn't stop at my door. The handle turned slowly, carefully, as if whoever was on the other side knew exactly how much pressure to use. I watched it move, inch by inch, until the latch clicked. The door opened just a crack. I couldn't see anything in the hallway. The darkness there was deeper than the darkness in my room, a solid thing that swallowed the light. From within, it came the smell I'd noticed on my first day, stronger now. Old flowers, rot. Something lived in and wrong. A hand slid through the gap. It was pale, almost translucent. The skin stretched thin over bones that looked too long. The fingers bent the wrong way at the joints, curling inward like hooks. It rested on the doorframe, and I felt a pressure in my chest, as if something was leaning on me from the inside. Then a voice spoke from the hallway. It sounded like mine. It said my name the way I say it when I'm alone, quietly, just to hear it. I don't remember screaming. I remember the door slamming shut. I remember the lock turning. I remember sitting on the bed until morning, my back against the wall, my eyes burning. The next day, I packed my things. As I carried my bags down the stairs, I noticed something I hadn't before. The walls were marked with faint handprints, overlapping and smeared, all at about chest height. They led toward the back hallway. I stood at the entrance to it for a long time. The air there was colder. The breathing was loudest here, a deep, satisfied rhythm. The hallway was dark, but not empty. I could feel it watching me, waiting for me to understand. I left without saying goodbye. I didn't get far. Halfway down the driveway, I realized I was still holding the key. It was warm in my hand, warmer than it should have been. Without thinking, I turned around to throw it back. The house was closer than it had been before. The trees leaned inward, their branches interlaced above the roof like fingers locking together. The windows were no longer dark. They glowed faintly, each one pulsing in time with the breathing. The front door was open. I woke up in my room. My bags were unpacked, my clothes folded neatly in the dresser. The door was locked. From the hallway came the sound of footsteps moving toward me, confident now, unafraid. I understood then. The room wasn't for rent. It was a mouth, and I had finally stopped pretending I didn't know what it was hungry for. The story ends here. Let's begin the next one. My security camera captured a woman rocking an empty cradle. Downstairs, I installed the cameras because of the break-in at Mrs. Henderson's place next door. She'd been gone for 3 days visiting her sister when someone pried open her back window and took everything of value, jewelry, cash, even her late husband's watch from the nightstand. The police said it was likely kids from the high school down the street looking for quick cash, but the violation of it, the intimacy of someone rifling through your drawers while you're away, left me shaken. I'd just moved into this old 2-story rental on Sycamore Street. A narrow Victorian with too many rooms for one person and a basement that groaned like a living thing every time the furnace kicked on. It felt vulnerable, exposed. So I spent a weekend wiring 4 security cameras, one covering the front porch, one aimed at the back door, one in the upstairs hallway outside my bedroom, and the last one mounted in the corner of the parlor downstairs, its lens angled to capture the entire room, including the antique cradle that came with the place. The landlord, Mr. Greeley, had been apologetic about the cradle. "Previous tenant left it behind," he'd said, scratching his bald spot with ink-stained fingers. "Supposed to have it hauled away, but, well, it's heavy, and honestly, it's kind of pretty, isn't it?" He wasn't wrong. It was a beautiful piece. Cherry wood darkened to near black with age, brass rails polished smooth by generations of hands, intricate scrollwork along the headboard depicting vines and birds in flight. It looked like something out of a museum, not a rented house in a working-class neighborhood. But it was also deeply unsettling, not because of its appearance, but because of its placement. It sat alone in the far corner of the parlor, directly beneath the only window, as if waiting for someone to lay a child inside. I'd planned to move it to the garage until the junk haulers came, but the first time I tried to lift it, I nearly threw out my back. It was absurdly heavy for its size, as if its hollow interior had been filled with lead or stone. After straining uselessly for 10 minutes, I gave up and decided I could live with it. It was just furniture, just wood and metal. Harmless. For the first week, the cameras recorded nothing but the mundane ballet of my solitary life. Me leaving for work at 7:15 a.m., returning at 6:30 p.m., making dinner in a tiny kitchen, reading on the couch before bed. The motion alert stayed silent. The house felt safe, secure. I began to relax, chalking my initial unease up to post-break-in paranoia. Then, on a Tuesday night, the alert pinged at 2:47 a.m. I was half asleep when my phone buzzed on the nightstand, the screen lighting up with the notification, "Motion detected, parlor." My heart lurched into my throat. I fumbled for the phone, my fingers clumsy with sleep, and tapped the alert to open the live feed. The parlor was dark, except for the faint blue glow of the camera's night vision. At first, I saw nothing unusual. The sofa, the bookshelf, the empty armchair. Then I noticed the cradle. It was moving, not vibrating from some distant truck passing on the street, not swaying from a draft. It was rocking, slowly, deliberately, back and forth with a smooth, rhythmic motion that spoke of a hand guiding it, a human hand. But the room was empty, completely, utterly empty. No shadowy figure crouched beside it, no intruder frozen in the act of fleeing, just the cradle rocking itself in the dead of night. I watched the live feed for 10 minutes, my breath shallow, my body rigid with fear. The rocking continued without variation, steady, hypnotic, unhurried. At exactly 2:57 a.m., it stopped, abruptly, as if an invisible hand had simply let go. The cradle settled into stillness, and her room returned to its silent vigil. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I told myself it was a mechanical failure, a loose spring in the cradle's base, perhaps, activated by the house settling. Or maybe a raccoon had gotten into the walls and its movements were transferring through the floorboards. Anything but what my gut was screaming, that something had been in my parlor, something that knew how to rock a cradle. The next morning, I reviewed the footage frame by frame. There was no trick of the light, no glitch in the camera. The cradle rocked for exactly 10 minutes, starting at 2:47 a.m. and ending at 2:57 a.m. And then, in the final seconds of the clip, as the rocking slowed to a stop, I saw it. A distortion in the air above a cradle-like heat haze on a summer road. It lasted only 3 frames, but it was unmistakable. The faint outline of a woman's form, seated in the space beside the cradle, her head bowed as if watching something inside. The image was translucent, wavering, but the shape was clear. A long skirt, a slender waist, hair pulled back in a severe bun, and then it was gone. I should have left then. Packed a bag and checked into a motel. But pride and financial reality held me in place. I'd signed a year's lease. Breaking it would cost me 2 months' rent I couldn't afford. And part of me, the stubborn, rational part that had gotten me through grad school on ramen noodles and sheer willpower, refused to be chased out by what might just be faulty wiring or overactive imagination. I decided to investigate. That afternoon I called Mr. Greeley. "The cradle in the parlor," I said, trying to keep my voice casual. "Do you know anything about its history? Previous owners?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When he spoke, his voice was carefully neutral. "Just an old piece of furniture. Been in that house longer than I've owned it. Why do you ask?" "I'm just curious," I said. "It's so heavy and detailed." Another pause, longer this time. "Look," he finally said, his voice dropping slightly. "The house was built in 1893. First owner was a doctor, Silas Thorne. He and his wife Clara lived there. Had a baby girl in 1895. Died of whooping cough before she was 6 months old." He cleared his throat. "They kept the nursery intact for years, even after they moved out. The cradle, it was hers. Every tenant since has complained about it. Said it moves on its own. Said they hear rocking at night. I always thought it was nonsense. Old houses make noises, but—" He trailed off. "But what?" I prompted, my mouth dry. "But the last tenant, the one who left the cradle behind, she moved out after 3 weeks. Wouldn't say why. Just packed up in the middle of the night and left the key in the mailbox. When I went to check the place, the cradle was in the parlor. It had been in the upstairs nursery before. She must have moved it herself. Why would she do that?" I didn't have an answer, but I knew, with a cold certainty, that settled, deep in my bones, that I wouldn't be sleeping much that night. I armed myself with logic and a flashlight. At 2:30 a.m., I crept downstairs, positioning myself in an armchair opposite the cradle, my phone recording video in my lap. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that I'd sit there for an hour, see nothing, and finally put this ghost story to rest. But at 2:47 a.m., the air in the room changed. It grew colder, so cold I could see my breath fogging in the moonlight, filtering through the window. And then, with a soft creak that seemed to come from the wood itself, the cradle began to rock. I didn't move. I barely breathed. I just watched, my phone capturing everything, as the rocking grew steadier, more pronounced. And then, slowly, a figure materialized beside the cradle, not all at once, but coalescing from the shadows like smoke given form. A woman in a high-collared black dress, her face pale and drawn, her eyes fixed on the empty space within the cradle. Her hands, translucent but unmistakable, rested on the brass rail, guiding the motion with a tenderness that broke my heart even as it terrified me. She was humming, a soft, wordless lullaby that vibrated not in the air, but in my bones. I wanted to run. Every instinct screamed at me to flee, but I couldn't look away. There was such profound sorrow in her posture, such aching love in the way her spectral fingers caressed the empty space where a child should have been. This wasn't a malevolent spirit. This was a mother trapped in the moment of her greatest loss, repeating the ritual that had once brought her daughter comfort. At 2:57 a.m., just as before, the rocking stopped. The woman's form began to fade, her eyes lifting from the cradle to meet mine through the darkness. For a single, breathless moment, we stared at each other across the gulf between worlds, and then she was gone, leaving only the scent of lavender and the echo of a lullaby in the silence. I didn't review the footage that night. I already knew what it would show. Instead, I went to the library the next day and dug through microfiche records of the local newspaper from 1895. It took hours, but I found it. A brief death notice for Eleanor Rose Thorne, aged 5 months and 12 days. A bright light extinguished too soon, the notice read. Her parents are inconsolable. Buried in the society pages was a follow-up article from 1896. Dr. and Mrs. Thorne to vacate Sycamore residence. The grieving couple plans to relocate to Boston, to be nearer to family, unable to bear the memories contained within their former home. Clara Thorne hadn't been able to leave her daughter behind. Not really. Her spirit had remained, tethered to the object most associated with her lost child, the cradle where she'd spent countless nights rocking away fevers and fussiness, where she'd whispered dreams and promises into downy hair that would never grow long. That night, I didn't hide. Upstairs. I went down to the parlor at 2:40 a.m. and sat in the armchair, a cup of tea cooling in my hands. At 2:47 a.m., the temperature dropped, and the cradle began to rock. Clara appeared as before, her form more solid this time, her eyes less focused on the cradle and more aware of my presence. She didn't seem surprised to see me, just resigned. "I know who you are," I said softly, my voice trembling but clear. "I know about Eleanor." Her head turned toward me slowly, her expression unreadable. The rocking never ceased. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I'm so sorry for your loss." A single tear traced a path down her translucent cheek, vanishing before it could reach her jaw. She looked back at the cradle, her hands tightening on the rail for a moment before relaxing again. The lullaby resumed, softer now, tinged with something that might have been gratitude. Night after night, I joined her. Sometimes I brought flowers, white lilies, the traditional flower of mourning, and placed them on the windowsill. Sometimes I simply sat in silence, bearing witness to her grief. The rocking never stopped. The cradle never held anything but empty air. But gradually, imperceptibly, Clara's form began to change. The lines of sorrow around her eyes softened. The tension in her shoulders eased. She began to look less like a prisoner of her pain and more like a woman learning to carry it. One night, as the first hints of dawn lightened the sky, she did something different. Instead of fading away at 2:57 a.m., she stood up from her invisible chair and walked toward me. I didn't flinch. I held her gaze as she stopped an arm's length away, her form shimmering like mist in morning sun. She reached out a hand, not to touch me, but to hover over my heart. And in that moment, I felt it. Not cold, not fear, but a wave of pure, unadulterated love so powerful it brought tears to my eyes. It was the love of a mother for her child, vast and eternal and unbroken by death. And then, with a final gentle smile, she turned and walked toward the window. As the first ray of sunlight touched the glass, her form dissolved into golden motes that scattered on an unfelt breeze. The cradle hasn't rocked since that night. I still have the cameras, but the motion alert stays silent. The house feels different now, not haunted, but peaceful, honored. I've left the cradle in the parlor. It's just wood and brass again, heavy and beautiful, and finally at rest. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, I'll sit in the armchair and imagine I hear the faintest echo of a lullaby in the wind. And I know that somewhere, in whatever realm lies beyond our understanding, a mother is finally holding her daughter again. The security camera captured a ghost rocking an empty cradle. But what it couldn't capture was the love that filled that emptiness night after night, until it was enough to set them both free. And that ends this story. A new one starts now. I answered a late-night room rental ad that I still can't forget. I wasn't looking for something permanent. That's important. If I had been trying to settle, I might have been more careful. But I only needed a place for a month, maybe 2. Somewhere cheap, somewhere quiet, somewhere I could sleep. I had just started a night shift job at a warehouse on the edge of the city. The pay was decent, but the hours were brutal, and most landlords didn't like the idea of someone coming and going at odd times. Hotels were too expensive, friends' couches were already worn thin, so I searched online, scrolling through local listings at 3 in the morning, eyes dry, brain half off. That's when I saw the post. No photos, no description really. Room for rent, private, quiet house, close to transit, cheap, call only. It had been reposted several times over the past few weeks. No comments, no replies underneath. That should have bothered me more than it did. I called. The man answered after the second ring. His voice was calm, steady, and oddly awake for the hour. "Yes," he said before I could speak. "The room is still available." We set a time for me to come by later that day. He gave me the address. Before hanging up, he said something that stuck with me. "I don't usually rent to night workers," he said, "but you might be a good fit." I didn't ask what he meant. The house was in an older part of the city, one of those neighborhoods that used to be nice and then got forgotten instead of ruined. Tall trees, narrow streets, homes built close together, each one slightly different, like they were designed by memory instead of plans. The house itself was tall and narrow, with dark siding and a porch that leaned just a little to the left. Nothing was broken. Nothing was boarded up. It just felt off, like it was holding its breath. The man opened the door before I knocked. Up close, he looked older than I expected. Late 60s, maybe early 70s. Gray hair combed neatly back, clean clothes, no smell of smoke or alcohol. His eyes were alert, but tired. "You're right on time," he said. Inside the house was very quiet, not peaceful quiet, empty quiet, like sound. Didn't like being there. No TV noise, no radio, no hum of appliances. Even the refrigerator didn't make a sound. I became very aware of my own breathing. He showed me the room upstairs, small but clean. A bed, a dresser, a desk, a single window facing the side yard. The lock on the door worked, which made me feel better. The price was lower than anything else I'd seen. "Any rules?" I asked. He hesitated. "Yes," he said. "Please don't leave your room between midnight and 4 a.m. And if you hear anything unusual, ignore it." I smiled, thinking he was trying to scare me. He didn't smile back. I moved in that night. The first few days were normal enough. I worked, came home, slept during the day. The house stayed quiet, too quiet. I never heard the owner move around. I never heard him cook, shower, or watch TV. Sometimes I wondered if he left at all. On the fourth night, I came home early. My shift ended sooner than usual, and I arrived around 11:30 p.m. The house was dark. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside. As soon as I closed it behind me, I felt it. That feeling you get when you realize you're not alone. I stood still, listening. From upstairs came a faint sound, slow footsteps, bare feet, moving carefully like whoever it was didn't want to be heard. I assumed it was the owner and started up the stairs. Halfway up, the footsteps stopped. Then they turned around. They came toward the stairs. I froze. A shape appeared at the top step, tall, thin, just a shadow against the darker hallway behind it. "Hello?" I said. The shape didn't move. Then slowly it stepped back out of sight. I waited a full minute before going up the rest of the way. The hallway was empty. All the doors were closed. I didn't sleep much that night. After that, things started to change. I began hearing sounds during the day, light tapping from inside the walls, soft dragging noises above the ceiling. Once, I heard what sounded like someone quietly crying from the room next to mine, even though I knew for a fact no one lived there. I asked the owner about it. He looked at me for a long moment, then said, "The house settles." I asked him if anyone else stayed there before me. "Yes," he said. "Where are they now?" "Not here," he replied. That was the end of the conversation. The first really bad night happened a week later. I woke up at 2:14 a.m. to the sound of someone whispering my name. Not shouting, not calling, whispering right outside my door. I lay completely still, heart pounding, staring at the dark shape of the door. The whisper came again, slower this time, like whoever was saying it was tasting. The sound, my name, then a soft knock, one knock, then another. I held my breath. The handle turned slightly, stopped, then turned back. Footsteps moved away down the hall. In the morning, I found scratches on the outside of my door, long, thin marks, like fingernails dragged down the wood. I didn't tell the owner. Sleep became difficult. When I did sleep, I dreamed of the house, hallways that stretched to toggle, doors that opened into rooms that didn't exist, people standing in corners facing the walls, whispering to themselves. One night, I woke up standing in the hallway. I don't remember getting out of bed. I was barefoot, facing the stairs, my body stiff like it didn't belong to me. From downstairs came a low sound like slow breathing, but deeper than a person's. I went back to my room and locked the door. The next morning, the lock was open. I started counting the footsteps. There were always more than one set, sometimes two, sometimes three. Once, I counted at least 6, moving in different directions, stopping and starting like they were confused or arguing silently. They never went downstairs between midnight and 4. They only stayed on my floor. One night, I heard them go into the empty room at the end of the hall. I heard the door open. I heard something heavy dragged across the floor. Then I heard crying. It sounded close, familiar. It sounded like me. I decided to leave. I packed my bags at noon and planned to go straight to a motel after my shift. I just needed one more night. That night, the house felt different, heavier. The air was warm and smelled faintly metallic, like blood. At exactly midnight, the footsteps started all at once, running, doors opening and closing, whispering turning into low, urgent murmurs. My doorknob shook violently. Something hit the door hard enough to make the frame crack. I screamed for the owner. The noise stopped instantly. The hallway went silent. I opened the door. At the end of the hall, the owner stood at the top of the stairs. "They know you're leaving," he said calmly. I asked him what they were. He sighed, like someone tired of explaining the same thing over and over. "This house attracts people who don't want to be alone," he said. "Sometimes they stay longer than their bodies do." I asked him why he rented rooms here. He looked at me with something close to pity. "Someone has to feed the house," he said. The lights went out. Hands grabbed me from behind, cold hands. Too many fingers. I don't remember how I got out. I woke up in my car, parked 3 blocks away, my bags in the back seat. My phone said it was 4:07 a.m. I never went back. I still hear footsteps at night. Not every night, just when I'm alone. They stop outside my bedroom door and wait. And sometimes, just before I fall asleep, I hear the owner's voice in my head, calm and steady. "You were a good fit." And I know the house is still hungry. This is where the story ends. Let's continue with the next. My phone records conversations with someone who isn't alive. The rent was the first red flag, whispering, "Too good to be true." $300 a month for a whole floor in a Victorian-era house on the outskirts of town? The online listing showed peeling paint and a sagging porch, but the price was impossible to ignore after my last roommate skipped out, taking half the deposit and my trust. I'd been couch surfing for weeks, swallowing my pride in instant noodles. So when Mrs. Gable, the landlady, met me with a jangling key ring and eyes that wouldn't quite hold mine, I signed the lease on the cracked formica counter of her cramped kitchen. She handed me the keys, heavy old brass, and mumbled something about the house having character and settling noises. Her knuckles were white on the edge of the counter. "Top floor is yours. Back staircase. Mind a step on the landing, it's loose. Utilities are included, but keep the lights on after dark. Saves trouble." She wouldn't elaborate, just shooed me out with a trembling hand, already turning toward her silent TV. The house smelled like time and neglect the moment I pushed open the heavy front door. Dust motes danced in the weak afternoon light, filtering through grimy stained glass. The air was thick, cold, despite the August heat outside, carrying the scent of mildew, old wood, and something else. faintly sweet like forgotten flowers left to rot in a vase. The back staircase was narrow, its banister sticky under my fingers. The third step groaned like a dying thing under my foot. The landing was dim, the single bare bulb overhead flickering erratically, casting jumping shadows. My room was at the end of a short hallway. The door opened onto a large space, high ceilings, a bay window overlooking the tangled, overgrown backyard, and a fireplace choked with decades of soot. The previous tenant had left nothing but a stained mattress on a rusted frame and a cracked porcelain sink in the corner. It was perfect, or it would be after I hauled my few boxes up. The price drowned out the unease tightening in my chest. The first night, the house sang, not with wind whistling through cracks, though there was plenty of that. This was different. The groans from the staircase were deeper, more resonant, like the bones of the house shifting. Floorboards creaked in the empty hallway outside my door, slow, deliberate footsteps that stopped just short of my threshold. I told myself it was the old plumbing cooling down, the wood contracting. I buried myself under a thin blanket, the unfamiliar darkness pressing in, the silence between the sounds feeling heavier than the noise itself. I woke once, sweating despite the chill, convinced I'd heard my name whispered, a breathy sigh that seemed to come from the corner near the fireplace. Just the wind in the chimney, I reasoned, turning on my phone flashlight to banish the shadows. The beam cut through the gloom, illuminating only dust and peeling wallpaper. Then the phone started acting up. It was my lifeline, my only expensive possession, a sleek, modern smartphone. The battery began draining inexplicably fast, even on standby. I'd charge it overnight, fully, and wake to find it at 15%. Apps would freeze mid-scroll. Sometimes, when I'd pick it up, the screen would flare with static for a split second before clearing. Annoying, but chalked up to the house's terrible Wi-Fi and maybe old wiring interfering. I bought a cheap signal booster, plugged it into the only working outlet near the window. It helped the connection, but the battery drain worsened. And then came the recordings. It started subtly. I'd be scrolling through photos, and a voice memo icon would appear on my screen that I hadn't created. Just a few seconds long, filled with static. I deleted them, assuming a glitch. Then one rainy Tuesday I heard it. I was making coffee at the tiny stove I'd set up near the sink, the sound of rain drumming on the roof, loud in the quiet house. My phone, sitting on the mattress, suddenly emitted a burst of sound, not a notification, but a playback. I snatched it up. A voice memo, recorded at 3:17 a.m. that morning. My own sleepy, confused voice. "What? Who's there? Stop it!" And underneath my voice, barely audible beneath a layer of distortion like radio interference, another voice, soft, whispery, almost melodic, but utterly devoid of warmth. It said, clear as ice cracking, "I'm here." My blood turned to slush. I hadn't recorded that. I hadn't said that. I played it again and again. My own voice was unmistakable, thick with sleep and fear. The other voice, it wasn't Mrs. Gable. It wasn't anyone I knew. It was a voice that didn't belong to this world. I checked the recording settings. Voice activation was off. The microphone permissions for the recording app were restricted. It made no sense. Paranoia, I told myself. Stress. Sleep deprivation. I deleted the file, my fingers clumsy with cold. That night, I slept with the phone face down, battery dead, on the floor across the room. It didn't matter. The next morning, another recording, time-stamped 2:48 a.m. My voice again, sharper this time, laced with a fear I didn't remember feeling. "Leave me alone. I don't know you." And the other voice, closer now, the distortion lessening slightly, revealing a tone that was almost curious. "You know me. You called. You always call when you're sad." The words slithered into my ear. I hadn't called anyone. I barely had anyone to call since moving here. My mother had passed 2 years ago, and the grief had driven a wedge between me and my few remaining friends. The mention of sadness felt like a violation. I threw the phone on the mattress, backing away as if it were radioactive. What was happening? Was the house bugged? Was Mrs. Gable spying? But why would she record me talking in my sleep? And that voice. I started noticing other things, small things that eroded my rationalizations. My favorite mug, the chipped blue one, would be found in the sink in the morning, though I always left it on the small table by the window. The temperature in the room would plummet suddenly, a localized cold spot near the fireplace that made my breath fog. Once, I woke to find the blanket pulled halfway off the mattress, as if tugged gently. The worst was the feeling of being watched, not from outside the window, but from the dark corners of the room itself, especially near the boarded-up fireplace. A heavy, patient attention that made the hairs on my neck stand up. I tried to research the house. Mrs. Gable clammed up tighter than a drum when I mentioned strange noises or cold spots. "Old houses settle," she'd repeat, wiping her hands on her apron, eyes darting away. The local library archives held little. Built in 1898 by a man named Silas Thorne, a reclusive watchmaker. He lived alone after his wife died in childbirth. Their infant son, Arthur, lived only 3 days. Silas reportedly became increasingly eccentric, rarely leaving the house until he was found dead in his workshop on the 3rd floor. My floor, in 1923. Cause of death unknown. The entry was brief, clinical. No mention of hauntings, just a sad, quiet end to a lonely man. But the dates stuck with me. Silas lost his wife and child. I'd lost my mother. Was that the thread this thing was pulling on? The recordings became more frequent, more invasive, always at night, always when I was asleep or drifting off. They weren't just snippets anymore. Full conversations my sleeping self was having with something. Recording, 1:55 a.m. Me, muffled, groggy. "Mom, is that you? It's so cold." Other voice. Softer, smoother now, almost maternal, but wrong. Too many layers like voices stacked on top of each other. "I'm not your mother, but I remember the cold, the deep cold after the light went out. You feel it too, don't you? The empty space." Me, voice trembling. "Arthur, your name was Arthur?" Other voice, a sound like dry leaves skittering on stone. "Silas called me that, before the silence, before the dark took the warmth. You have warmth, share it." I played that one a dozen times, nausea rising in my throat. How did it know about Arthur? How did it know about my mother? About the empty space her death left? This wasn't just a recording glitch. This was communication. This was an intelligence using my own voice, my own deepest vulnerabilities as a conduit. I tried screaming into the phone during the day, demanding it show itself. Leave me alone. Nothing. The recordings only happened at night, when my guard was down, when the house itself seemed to hold its breath. I started sleeping with earplugs. Useless. The next recording came through anyway, time-stamped 4:03 a.m. Me, voice thick with tears I didn't remember shedding. It hurts. It always hurts. Why doesn't it stop? Other voice, closer than ever, the distortion almost gone, revealing a young man's voice, but hollow, echoing from a great distance. The hurt is the thread. The thread binds us. Silas cut his thread. He left me alone in the cold. Don't cut your thread. Stay warm for me. Let me in. Me, whispering broken. I'm scared. Other voice, a sigh like wind through bare branches. So was I, before the quiet. That was the breaking point. I couldn't stay there another night. I packed frantically at dawn, shoving clothes and toiletries into my backpack, the meager boxes forgotten. I'd sleep in my car, find a motel, anything. As I grabbed my keys, my phone buzzed on the bedside table. A notification, a new voice memo. Recorded 5 minutes ago. My hand shook as I tapped play. No static this time. Crystal clear. Me, my voice, but calm, eerily calm, a voice I didn't recognize as my own. You can't leave. The thread is tied. You called. Remember? When you cried for your mother in the dark that first night? You called into the silence. I heard. I've been waiting so long for someone to call. Silas stopped calling. He went quiet. But you're loud with your sadness. It warms me. Stay. Let me share your warmth. Let me be your Arthur. Your Silas is gone. I can be your family now. The voice wasn't mimicking me perfectly. It was inhabiting me, using my vocal cords, my breath, to speak its own terrible desire. I dropped the phone as if burned. It clattered on the bare floorboards, the screen still glowing, the playback bar still moving. I didn't wait to hear the end. I bolted down the back staircase, the loose step screaming under my weight, out the creaking front door into the gray morning light. I didn't look back. I drove to a 24-hour diner 10 miles away, ordered coffee I couldn't taste, and tried to call Mrs. Gable. Her number went straight to voicemail. I called a friend, my words tumbling out in a desperate rush. They sounded skeptical, concerned for my mental state. Old house, stress, grief. Maybe it's time to see someone. They didn't understand. They hadn't heard the voice. They hadn't felt the cold spot that clung to the back of my neck even now in the brightly lit diner. I couldn't go back. Not ever. I forfeited my deposit, my half-packed boxes of clothes, and the stained mattress. I found a cramped, overpriced studio apartment across town, tripled the rent, but it had solid walls and neighbors whose voices I could hear through the thin walls, living, breathing people. I bought a cheap burner phone for calls and texts. My old smartphone, the one that recorded the conversations, I wrapped in layers of aluminum foil and stuffed deep into the bottom of my backpack, buried under dirty socks like contaminated waste. I hadn't powered it on in 3 days. The silence was bliss. The fear began to recede, replaced by exhaustion and the grim reality of my depleted savings. Maybe, just maybe, it was over. Maybe the entity, Arthur or Silas or whatever, lingered in that decaying wood and plaster, was tied to the place. I'd escaped the haunted ground. Last night, the first truly quiet night in the new apartment, I finally slept deeply. No footsteps, no whispers, no unnatural cold. I woke feeling almost human. Sunlight streamed through the window. I stretched, the familiar ache of my old mattress replaced by the firmness of a new futon. Peace. I reached for my backpack, needing my wallet. My fingers brushed the foil-wrapped lump at the bottom. The foil was gone. My old smartphone lay on top of my clothes, screen dark. My breath hitched. I hadn't touched it. I hadn't unwrapped it. Slowly, dreading what I'd see, I picked it up. The battery icon showed full charge. The wallpaper was still my old photo of my mother smiling on a beach I'd never visited with her. My thumb hovered over the power button. "Don't!" screamed every instinct. "It's just a phone, a broken phone. It can't hurt you here." But the cold spot bloomed on the back of my neck again, a familiar, intimate chill. I pressed the button. The screen lit up instantly. No passcode prompt. It went straight to the voice memo app. A new recording. Time-stamped 3:33 a.m. last night. Here, in this safe new apartment. My finger tapped the play button before I could stop myself. Silence for 3 seconds. Then my own voice, clear and calm, speaking words I had no memory of forming in the deepest part of my sleep. "The thread is strong. It stretches. It doesn't break. I found you. The new place is bright, but it's still cold inside you. Don't be afraid of the quiet. Soon you won't be alone anymore. I'm bringing the warmth back. I'm coming to get you." The recording ended. The screen stayed lit. The photo of my mother's smiling face staring back at me. The apartment was silent. No neighbors talking. No traffic hum. Just the deafening thud of my own heart and the suffocating certainty that the cold spot on my neck wasn't just a spot anymore. It was a presence, patient, familiar. And it wasn't waiting outside my door this time. It was already here. It had always been here, riding in my backpack, waiting for me to sleep, waiting for me to be lonely, waiting to use my own voice to tell me it was coming home. The phone screen glowed in the sunlit room, a tiny, impossible window into a darkness that had followed me. I don't know how to stop it. I don't even know if it is one thing or two. Silas and Arthur, fused by decades of sorrow and silence, drawn to the echo of my own grief like moths to a dying flame. All I know is the recordings will keep coming, and one night, when the thread pulls tight enough, when the cold finally reaches my bones, I'll hear my own voice on the phone, speaking words I didn't choose, welcoming it in. The phone is still in my hand. It's starting to vibrate. Not a call, not a text, just a low, insistent thrum against my palm, like a heartbeat that isn't mine. The screen flickers. The playback bar is moving again. I can't make myself look. I can't make myself stop listening. It's already playing. And this time, it's singing my name.